Have you seen those stupid little TikTok trends that have been going around lately? You know, the ones where on a person's 18th birthday they can choose between two different abilities, and the choices are some stupid shit, like being able to see how much money a person has in their bank account, or being able to see if someone is your soulmate or not. Well, guess what? I'm the poor sap that has to live with one of those abilities in real life. I can see how old a person is by their shiny white numbers that float above their heads. It's not glamorous or cool. Okay, I take that back. I'm a blast when I go to the county fair and hit up the guess my age stall. I'm being sarcastic if you couldn't tell. My ability is pretty much useless and downright annoying sometimes. I mean, how is a guy supposed to save the world just by knowing how old somebody is? What I'm getting at is, being able to see people's ages is more of a nuisance than a superpower. The numbers are pretty blinding, and my attention always gravitates to right above a person's head, even if I'm not trying to. Now imagine how that looks to the pretty girl you're talking to, and all they can see is you staring just slightly behind them. I've gotten one too many slaps in the face for doing that. I wasn't always a freak though. There was a period in my life when I was a normal kid with a regular childhood. The seeing people's ages thing happened after the near-death experience I had when I was 10 years old. Thankfully, nothing too traumatic happened. I got stung by a bee and almost drowned in a pool. It was the end of summer and my parents were hosting their annual back-to-school barbecue. Everyone had just gone inside to escape the sweltering summer heat and eat some good food. As good as my salt is spicy white parents could whip up, that is. I stayed outside to play by myself a bit since I was the only kid there. It was always my parents' friends and a few extended family members who went to those parties. None of my friends. The party was mostly for my parents who were just celebrating having made it through another summer with me. It's not like I was a bad kid or anything though. Or maybe I was, and I'm just remembering things differently. Otherwise, maybe I wouldn't have almost died. I was 10, so my parents didn't worry too much about me playing out in the backyard by myself. After all, at that age, I was supposed to be a big boy. Anyway, I was out by the pool playing with some random toy when a bee suddenly landed on my hand. The thing you should know about me is that I'm deathly allergic to bees. Like carrying around an EpiPen in my pocket at all times allergic to bees. I froze when I saw it, too scared to do anything. The bee must have been in a bad mood that day because it decided I was a threat and stung me, even though I hadn't done anything. I swatted the thing off my hand as a hot, searing pain started to radiate through my skin. I stood up after, freaking the hell out, as I could feel my skin puff up and the sensation of my throat slowly starting to close. In my panic, I hadn't been paying too much attention to my surroundings. One misstep and I plummeted into the deep end of our in-ground pool. At least the water was refreshing enough to cool the heat flooding through my veins for a quick second. In that quick second, I remembered the existence of my EpiPen. I frantically grabbed for the life-saving medication in my pocket, feeling what little air supply I had left in my lungs quickly leaving me. My heart sank as I realized my EpiPen wasn't in my pocket anymore. My vision was starting to blur and had become dotted with a bunch of little stars around the edges. I desperately searched around in the water as I continued to sink deeper. Finally, my eyes landed on the white, blue, and orange pen. Resisting the immense urge to breathe in, I reached out for the EpiPen. The first swipe, and it was just the tips of my fingers. The motion, however, made the pen sink farther away from me. Some bubbles came out of my mouth in a grunt of frustration. That wasn't good, seeing as that breath out was about 50% of the oxygen I had left. With all my might, which wasn't much since I was oxygen deprived, I managed to swim down and grab my EpiPen. By that point, my vision was almost completely black and my lips tingled something fierce. Blue to the sky, orange to the thigh. I thought to myself as I uncapped the thing and stabbed myself in the leg, praying the medicine would work underwater. After that, all the fight left me, and everything went black and numb. Obviously, I didn't die. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today typing this out for you to read. I awoke in the hospital about 2 months later, where the doctors informed me I was less than a minute away from dying when I was rescued. Thank God my mom had a gut feeling and went outside to check on me. To this day, she tells me, It was just a little too quiet in the house, and I had a bad feeling. Mom found my EpiPen floating on the surface of the pool and my body at the bottom. She jumped in and managed to get me back to the surface, where I coughed up most of the water I swallowed, but stayed unconscious. Turns out my brain lost enough oxygen to go into hibernation mode or something, causing my body to enter into a comatose state. It took 2 months for my brain to get its shit together enough for me to handle consciousness. You'd think the worst part about coming back from a coma would be all the therapy that came after it. The physical therapy to learn how to walk again and regain control over my limbs. The speech therapy to learn how to talk again. The actual therapy where I had to express all my feelings towards what happened to me. Yeah, all that bullshit sucked ass. Don't get me wrong. To me though, the worst part was everybody asking me what it was like to be in a coma. I'd constantly been berated by the nurses, doctors, and even my parents about what I remembered during my extended slumber. Which, by the way, wasn't much. It was mostly black nothingness. The only thing I vaguely remember was a dream. There was a garden, big and ethereal, like every plant conceivable to man was planted there, and then some. Plants that had never been seen before to the human eye. It could only be described as beautiful. There was also a woman there who was sweet and motherly-like. Her hair was blonde and looked as if it had been spun by an orb weaver spider. She wore a long white silk dress, and her essence reminded me of a goddess. The most interesting thing about her were her eyes. It's like they changed color every second, never staying one specific hue. I think we had a conversation, but this all happened so long ago I can't tell you what was said. The dream ended with her kissing my forehead. After that was when I woke up. After coming out of the coma, I knew something was different about me. For one, there were these glistening white numbers that were plastered above everybody else's head. It was also like a new purpose had been given to my life. All these years later, I couldn't tell you what it is. Even that feeling of purpose has seemed to dim. Having no possible clue what the numbers could mean, I did the reasonable thing any kid would do. Ask the nearest adult. Hey Dad, what does the number 47 mean? I wrote it on the notepad the hospital staff had given to me to write with since I wasn't able to use my vocal cords correctly yet. My father scrunched his eyes in confusion. What are you talking about, Henry? I scribbled some more. The number above your head, the 47? What does it mean? Are you sure you're feeling alright? He asked, eyeing me up and down suspiciously, like I had just committed a very serious crime. I nodded my head. I felt fine. I just wanted to know what the damn numbers stood for. Instead of answering my question, Dad left the room to track down the nearest doctor. The rest of that afternoon was spent getting a whole bunch of brain scans done, all of which came back normal. I had no growths, tumors, or brain bleeds that would explain why I was seeing numbers above everyone's head. That night, I sat in my hospital bed, feeling dejected. Nobody could explain to me why I was seeing things nobody else saw. My mother was beside me, rubbing my hand, trying to comfort me. The number 45 glistened above her head, drowning in self-pity and tired from being poked and prodded all day. I fell asleep. That night, I dreamt about the lady in the garden again. She held me in a tight, warm embrace, and then whispered something in my ear. When I woke up the next morning, I felt better, enlightened. Mom, how old are you? I scribbled on the closest napkin after she brought me breakfast. That's an interesting question, dear, she told me. It's a rude question to ask a lady, but I'm 45. It was then that I knew I could see people's ages. After another month in the hospital, I was finally released and able to go home. What is the first thing you think I did after coming home from the hospital? I told all of my friends of my new ability, of course. This, my friends, is when my ability started to ruin my life. Nobody believed me, even when I tried to prove it. No one even thought it was cool that I could supposedly see how old a person was. My friends dumped me, and I became known as the freak who lied about everything. The bullying was bad too. Oh God, the bullying. Even my teachers got so annoyed at the insistence of my ability that my parents were called. I got a lecture. The only thing I learned from it was to keep my mouth shut and don't tell anyone I can see their age. All it would lead to was pain and misery. We eventually moved out of that town and I got to move schools. It was a fresh start for me. To go to a school where nobody thought I was weird or a liar. Of course, I didn't dare tell anybody about my ability or my past either. I was never the same after all that. I stuck to staying in the shadows. Nobody would notice me if they didn't know I was there after all. To this day, I regret my decision to tell anybody about my curse. High school came and went, and I graduated. High school was enough for me, so I didn't move up to higher education. Instead, I did the only reasonable thing a person in my situation could do. Become a bartender. The pay was adequate for the long hours I worked. I got to sleep in on most days, and my boss was chill. His name is Marty, and he owns Marty's, the bar I work at. The place was small and barely up to health code, but I considered it my second home. My first home being the apartment right above the bar that Marty leased to me. My ability made my job a little easier, especially when the state sent in a miner to make sure we were IDing people. I was always at the top of my game. Their spy wouldn't make it 3 feet from the door before I turned them away. When their fake ID didn't check out either, they sulked right out of the bar. Every time a kid came in with their ironclad fake ID, they got turned around. When they protested that they were of age, I told them that the cops could come down here and verify their age for themselves. That usually got them to stop mouthing off and leave. Now, tonight was like any other night at Marty's. I'd been in the middle of a small rush around midnight. How it usually was at that time of night, slinging drink after drink. I was also alone as usual. Seeing as I was a seasoned bartender, I didn't really need a bar back or another bartender. Even though the extra help would have been nice, Marty couldn't really afford it though. It was busy enough where I didn't see her slip in. I had turned around to blend a third frozen margarita for Gladys, one of Marty's regulars. I was stuck in a conversation with her about how good it was to still be youthful. Gladys was full of shit. She always went around telling everyone she was only 46. But her true age sat right above her head in big bold numbers saying 59. When I turned back, I noticed the woman sitting there at the end of the bar. As it had become second nature to me, I glanced above her head slightly to see her age. The frozen margarita almost fell out of my hands. The woman had been typing away at her phone, so she didn't notice me fumbling. I quickly handed Gladys her margarita before haphazardly trying to recollect myself. "What can I do for you tonight?" I asked her as confidently as I could muster. I rubbed my eyes, pretending to be a little sleepy. In reality, I rubbed my eyes to make sure I was seeing her age correctly. Above the woman's head in stark white letters was the number 300. At first I thought I misread the number. After all, she looked like she should have been in her early 30s, not 300. But alas, the number 300 was firm where it stood. Her hair was long, wavy, in a dark shade of ebony, as if her hair was the night sky itself. She had glistening brown eyes that had this hunger behind them. She also wore a shade of red lipstick that popped out at you. For her pale complexion, the color looked really good on her. Ever since I'd gained my ability, the only ages I've seen were normal ones, only going up to 3 digits ones when I met a World War I veteran. This woman had to be the oldest person I've ever seen. Against my better judgment, I chalked her numbers up to somehow being a fluke. There was no way anyone could actually live to 300 years old, right? "I'll have a Bloody Mary," she said with a toothy smile. Something about her perfect white teeth sent shivers down my spine. It irked me. "Anything else I can get for you?" I asked, remembering it was rude to stare, though she seemed to revel in the uneasy look in my eyes. "Names are a powerful thing, you know," the woman stated as she rested her chin on the backs of her hands. I could tell she was toying with me. I chuckled as I grabbed a tall skinny glass and a stalk of celery. "Well, my name has no power to it. I'm Henry. It's nice to meet you." I stuck my hand out to her. She smiled and let out a small laugh before taking my hand and shaking it. "Harley." Harley. What a fitting name for the woman in front of me. She wore a leather jacket over a plain white t-shirt. If I had to describe her in one word, it would be biker girl. "I like you, Henry," Harley said, flipping some of her long hair behind her shoulder. The flirtatious action made a knot form in my stomach. "Thank you," I said, forcing myself to smile, handing her drink to her. I took a second to look her over again before starting to tend to the other customers in the bar. I made sure to keep an eye on Harley the whole time, my curiosity getting the better of me. About an hour later, one of the regulars, Jep, started to hit on Harley. He was 6 beers deep and couldn't tell his ass from a water hose. "Come on, sweet. Come back home with the Jep. I'll treat you right, sugar. We'll have a fun time." He slurred drunkenly as he wrapped a hand holding a bottle of beer around her shoulder. I could see Harley's features contort into an expression of uncomfortableness. "All right, Jep," I started, slinging the towel I was using to clean a glass over my shoulder. "I'm cutting you off. Clearly, you've had enough to drink tonight." Jep waved me off and brought his forehead to Harley's boob, where he squeezed it tightly. A look of shock and fury filled her face. "Jep," I said testingly, grabbing the beer out of his hand. "Leave him alone, man," the 18-year-old kid who came in with Jep shouted from next to the drunkard. The only reason I let him stay at the bar is because he only ordered a can of Coke. Normally, he never caused trouble when him and Jep came in anyway. Jep must have been this guy's into college parties since he was only 22, but with a name like Jep, I expected him to be 63. Jep was getting more handsy, and I could tell Harley was going to snap at any moment. "The both of you, get out of here, now, before I call the cops on you for giving me a fake ID, and Jep for letting you stay in here, knowing you were a minor." Like a deer caught in the headlights, the kid went. "How did you?" I cut him off. "I don't tolerate harassment of any kind at my bar. Get out. Now." Jep's friend grabbed him off of Harley before quickly running out of the bar and into the streets. Harley dusted herself off while staring at the direction the duo ran away in. She then looked back at me and shot me an icy glare. "Thanks, but I could have handled that myself." I shrugged in response and went back to cleaning up around the bar. The rush had ended a while ago and only a few patrons were left. A couple, Gladys and Harley. When I turned back to Harley, I noticed she was gone. In her place was a $5 bill in her drink glass. Not one drop had been sipped from the Bloody Mary. I shrugged the ominous feeling that Harley left behind and went back to my closing duties. I kicked a few drunks out of the bar, called them taxis, and then closed Marty's down for the night. The sound of heels crunching against gravel took my attention off the back door to the bar. A tall shadow stood at the alleyway entrance. I tucked my keys in between my fingers and tightened the grip on the garage back in my other hand. Like I said earlier, a familiar voice echoed off the walls in the alley. "I can handle myself." Harley stepped into the edge of light coming from a street lamp behind her, wiping off her face with her sleeve. Blood. Her mouth was covered in blood, and she had a crazed look in her eyes. Her once white shirt now a rusted brown color. She smiled at me again. This time, 2 huge fangs hung in her mouth. The word vampire flooded my mind as her H started to shine more intently above her head. The woman before me was literally 300 years old. A 300-year-old vampire. She was on me quick, giving me no time to prepare or defend myself. The garbage bag and keys in my hand fell to the ground as I was stuck in her strong grasp. Harley pulled my black polo down and licked the area where my neck and shoulders connected, sending weirdly pleasurable tingles down my spine. I braced myself for the pain that would come from the bite when she eventually stopped licking me. I heard her hiss as a hot stench of iron filled my nostrils. "Don't worry, Henry. I'll make it quick." Harley then clamped her jaw shut as she bit down. I screamed out in pain as I imagined all the blood being sucked from my veins, my body withering into nothing but a husk, and Harley standing over my corpse, full and satisfied with my exsanguination. I started crying as my mind flooded with regrets. How much better could my life have been if I never told anyone about my ability? Maybe my parents wouldn't think I was crazy and a disappointment. Maybe I could have gotten a girlfriend. settled down, gotten a nice house, and had a kid. In my hysteria, I hadn't noticed there had been no pain at all. Harley had released me. When realization struck, I spun around in confusion. My neck was fine, and not a single blood cell was taken from me. Harley stood behind me chuckling to herself, as if she should have known better. In the palm of her hand was a sharp fang. It belonged to her, seeing as a nice gap was in place where her upper left canine once rested in her gums. "Ah, fuck," she yelled out in an angry laugh, stomping her black leather Doc Martens on the ground. Harley looked me in the eye, a deep-seated hatred behind her eyes. "You're a goddamn chosen." I fixed my shirt and pressed myself up against the back door to the bar, still processing the events that just happened. Harley, the 300-year-old vampire standing in front of me, just tried to drain me of my blood. Instead, she ended up breaking one of her fangs and was currently giving me an "if looks could kill" stare. I'm a what now? Never mind that," I screamed. "You're a fucking vampire." In a second, she was back on me, holding my mouth shut. Harley whispered menacingly in my ear, "Christ, shut the hell up. You know, you might be one of the chosen, and I might not be able to drink you, but that doesn't mean I still can't kill you." I pushed her off me, less scared of her than I was a second ago. A breathless laugh escaped my mouth as I ran my hand through my short brown hair. "I still don't know what you're talking about." "Uh-huh, sure you don't." Harley rolled her eyes and shoved her hand in my face. Fang pointed right at my eyeball. "I can't believe I was stupid enough to fall for that nerd's trap. Where is he, huh? How far away is that little twerp, Nate?" "Listen, lady," I said, trying to be menacing, shoving the fang out of my personal space. "You better start talking some sense, or I'll knock that other fang right out of your mouth." Harley chuckled. "I'd like to see you try, sweetheart." Before stuffing her tooth into the pocket of her leather jacket, she looked unsure of herself, like I might really be able to knock her other tooth out. She took a few steps back and started laughing nervously to herself. Something had her spooked. "Well, this is clearly an act you've got going on here. That, or you really are as clueless as you look. Either way, it's been fun, but I'm getting the hell out of here while I still can." Harley threw out a peace sign as she turned to leave and melted back into the shadows, but suddenly stopped in her tracks. She let out a groan of frustration as she clenched her fists. No, shit! I scrunched my eyebrows in confusion. This whole situation was just so odd. Then again, so is a guy who can see how old people are. "Going somewhere, Harley?" An unfamiliar voice rang out from the entrance of the alleyway. He stepped into the light, holding his hand out in front of him, like he was using the force. What a shame. The party was just getting started. Well, one thing is for sure. Harley was right. This kid was definitely a nerd. He wore tennis shoes, beige khaki pants, and a dark navy blue sweater vest on top of a white dress shirt. He even had big oversized framed glasses to match. Who I'm presuming to be the infamous Nate Harley was going on about earlier was tall, dark and handsome, but I could definitely tell he was just a teenager. What was weird though was that for the first time that wasn't on TV or looking at people through a mirror, I couldn't see his age. There were no numbers above his head. He just looked like a normal guy. Who I'm still presuming to be Nate said, "Why don't we dance a little?" He then started to flick his wrist around all willy-nilly, as if being a marionette and him the puppet master. Harley then started dancing around foolishly. Clearly, she had no control over her own actions. She hissed out angrily, "Oh, when I get my hands on you, you're so dead." In shock and awe, I watched as this cool biker chick ungraciously flailed around, by the hands of a nerd no less. Slowly, he was starting to look less and less like a dweeb, as the air of confidence that this kid carried around him made him look almost awesome. Alright, that's enough for now. Party's over," Nate said as Harley's movement hitched to a stop. He left her right arm in the air, knees twisted in and hit down, not unlike a Michael Jackson pose. "I hope you rot in hell," Harley cursed as she gained a little control back over her neck muscles and glared at the teen in front of her. She was seething mad. I think I could make out a faint stream of steam coming out of her ears. Nate chuckled as he flicked his wrist one final time. Well, at least you'll be down there, right beside me. A sickening crunch filled the crisp night air as all the bones in Harley's neck snapped as her hit did a 180. This was followed by the sound of her limp body falling to the gravel floor. Nate brushed the imaginary dust of his hands as he patted himself on the back, triumphantly. I felt my dinner threatening to come back up as I leaned my body against the wall for support. My vision was spinning. I don't know what I was expecting, but it sure wasn't that. That was gruesome. Jesus Christ, is she dead? I asked as Nate closed the distance between himself and the corpse on the ground. Harley's eyes were still open and seemed to be piercing my soul. Nate nudged her shoulder, checking for any signs of a reaction. All he got was her body flopping onto its back due to gravity. Nope. As if on cue, Harley's body seemed to liquefy. Nate quickly backed up as if scared to get any Harley on his pristine shoes. The mass beneath her clothes started to bubble and gurgle as it turned into this black, steaming pile of goo. The goo laid claim to the clothes and then started to permeate and seep into the ground. A second later, all evidence of the vampire's existence had all but melted on the ground. The only thing in its wake, a small black scorch mark. I scrunched my nose in disgust at the scene I was just a witness to. Nate just stood there as if it were an everyday occurrence. That looks pretty dead to me, I exclaimed, struggling to keep the bile in my throat from rising anymore. In the span of 5 minutes, I'd been almost killed by a vampire, met a guy whose age I couldn't see, seen a puppet show, and watched a corpse melt. Don't worry, newbie, she'll come back. They always do. I didn't know how to respond to that. She'll rise again at the spot where she first died and became a vampire, Nate stated matter-of-factly. Great, I replied, rolling back my eyes, because that clears everything up. Hey listen man, I heard the tail end of that conversation. Seems to me we've got something in common. You live around here? He asked nonchalantly, as if he hadn't just used the force on one of my previous bar patrons and disposed of the evidence in one fell swoop. I nodded my head behind me, gesturing to Marty's. I sleep upstairs. Nate wiped his hand under his nose as he sniffed in a quick breath of air. Perfect, I could use a drink. Somehow, I, Henry West, your average bartender at Marty's, found myself sitting on the edge of a king-sized bed next to a very questionable stain in a city motel somewhere in backwoods Maine. Don't ask me how I got here because I'm not so sure myself. There's a good chance, however, my journey began after sharing a drink with Nate. Now normally, I don't condone serving alcohol to minors, but the guy did kinda save my ass from becoming vampire fodder, so it was the least I could do. After a few shots of bourbon and a long conversation, I learned some things. First, Nate's full name was Nathaniel Beckett Wallen, and he was 19 years old. He's been kicking vampire ass for 3 years. Turns out, me and the kid actually have a lot in common. We both had near-death experiences for one. Mine wasn't nearly as bad as his though. Nathaniel became orphaned when he was 16 after he and his family got into a bad car wreck. Their car had been T-bonded by a semi. The driver had fallen asleep at the wheel and lost control of the vehicle. At first, they thought everyone in the car had passed away. But by some miracle, Nate survived. But barely. I got to see the scar on his right arm from when they had to do reconstructive surgery on it after the accident. I'm sure there were more, but I don't think he felt comfortable showing them to me. We were still practically strangers to one another. Nate also had dreamt about the woman in the garden, just like I did. He was about to elaborate more for me though. The garden had a name, the Garden of Mara. Mara was the lady in the garden. Nate informed me. She was a goddess, and not just any goddess, the goddess of life. She also represents light and good, and apparently when someone dies, their soul gets to rest peacefully in the garden. More importantly, Nate was able to remember their conversation. He didn't really tell me what exactly was said, but what he did tell me was that they talked. She hugged him and sent him back after kissing him on the forehead. After that, he had the ability to control vampires, just like how after I almost died, I woke up being able to see people's ages. Mara's chosen few. That's what Nate called us. Now it made sense why Harley called me a chosen earlier. He told me we were handpicked by Mara and given our own unique abilities to stop an immensely evil force. Her brother, Ellison, the god of death, was Mara's complete opposite. Who knew death had such a dorky name, by the way? Basically, he stands for evil and darkness. Before her was him, all alone in the darkness. Mara brought light into this world and gave him a friend. The two were inseparable at first. She was the yang to his yin. Mara even created the garden as their little spot where they could hang together. Then after a while, she got bored and created life. Apparently, he got jealous of her creations since she started spending more of her energy on them than on her own brother. He then tried to gain her attention back by destroying the life she had created. Yeah, Ellison sent the meteor that killed all the dinosaurs. Understandably upset, Mara banished Ellison from her garden. Then she created humans in the aftermath of the dinosaurs' extinction and made them live on Earth with her new creations. To rub more salt in the wound, Ellison, being the god of death, has to bring human souls back to the garden when they die. Every time, he asked Mara to be let back in, and every time she denied him, Ellison eventually became fed up and bitter. So he created vampires out of some of the souls that he collected. Their sole purpose was to torment, drain, and kill other humans. His creatures have the primal desire to hurt his dear sister's creations and suck their life force out of them. The goal, just like with the dinosaurs, is to wipe out the human race, just to see a sister suffer. In an effort to combat his plot to destroy her world, Mara selected 3 of her finest humans and turned them into warriors who were meant to fight off the vampire infestation. They were given immunity to vampire bites and had abilities that could stop the bloodsuckers. But since controlling how a person dies wasn't within her territory, Mara couldn't protect her soldiers from death completely. That's why there was such an age gap between me and Nate. There had been others before us, and if they die, then another is chosen to take their place. Finally, Nate revealed the true purpose of our powers. There was one of the chosen who could see the true age of a vampire. They were to alert the one who could control vampires long enough to keep them still, so that the last chosen one could light their asses on fire and kill them for good, since only light can destroy the darkness, and what better source of light than fire? We were destined to be a tag team of sorts. How do you know all this? Is this what Mara told you? I had asked Nate after he finished giving me the basic rundown of our situation. I scratched my chin confused on why in the 17 years since I got my ability, I hadn't known about any of this. Wouldn't it have made sense for vampires to want to track me down, seeing as I could literally blow their cover? Then again, Harley was none the wiser when she came into the bar, so maybe we smelled like regular schmegular humans to them. More or less, was all he told me. So, if there's supposed to be 3 of us, that's what I was going to ask you, Henry. I've been on a mission to eradicate the vampire race for years now, and I finally have a solid lead on where the chosen with the fire ability is. With your ability to pinpoint the vamps and my ability to control them, we'll be able to do a lot of good in this world. We'll be unstoppable once all 3 of Mara's chosen few are united. So, are you with me? Wait, does that mean you were looking for me? Have you been looking for me all this time? I asked frantically. The once dwindling flame of purpose inside me was now a roaring blaze. Had I finally found my people? My purpose? Nate shrugged his shoulders playfully. More or less. Well then, Nate. I stuck my hand out to shake his. We're going on a mission. The loud sound of a rumbling muffler pulling into the motel's parking lot broke me out of my daydream. A second later, Nate opened the door to our room. Get ready, he said as a brown ball of clothes was thrown at me. After changing into the light brown khaki costume Nate had given me, I slung the small backpack that carried all the belongings I'd taken from Marty's with me over my shoulder. I then stopped and picked out the open door and took a look at the rust bucket that Nate had pulled up in. "Do we really have to go in that rolling death trap?" I said, pointing to the white kidnapper-looking van in the parking lot. "Isn't that hunk of junk just going to give our position away?" "Precisely the opposite, young blood. That hunk of junk is exactly what they're expecting," Nate said, patting my shoulder as I exited the musty-smelling motel room. "Can you stop talking to me like that? I'm older than you, Nate. Like a lot older." I grunted out, annoyed. Nate scoffed. "True, but I have more experience than you." He got me there. "Weren't you ever taught to respect your elders?" I grumbled under my breath. "Yeah, whatever, Gramps," Nate replied back jokingly. I ran out of clever and witty retorts to say as we piled into the van. Giant baby blue words saying "devilishly fast delivery" were plastered on either side of the windowless van, with little devil horns and a tail accompanying the logo. The clothes Nate tossed me earlier was a Party City delivery driver Halloween costume that Nathan bought. It rolled up my crotch uncomfortably as I settled into the passenger seat. He'd gotten me a size too small. We were the same size, but he said they only had one in our size left. Since he bought the costumes and pretty much set everything up, I got stuck with the smaller costume. A thick folded blue paper landed in my lap, aiding the uncomfortable sensation in my nether regions. I folded it open. It revealed the layout of a large multi-floor structure. "That's the blueprints for the facility. Look it over. Memorize it. Become one with it. Don't make me have to come save your ass while we're in there," Nate said seriously as he peeled out of the parking lot. We had about an hour drive ahead of us until we got to the marvelous Maddie's Mental Health Institution. That's where the chosen with the fire ability was being kept. Nate says her name is Emily Richardson. All he was able to find out was that she's been locked up in that mental hospital for 4 years. Nate looked over at me nervously. "Let's go over the plan one more time." I nodded politely. Clearly, Nate was used to working alone. "We're posing as delivery drivers making a routine medical supply drop-off. Once we get inside the facility, our main goal is to find and save Emily." Nate points to an area on the blueprints that has been circled in red marker. "We'll most likely find her here in the activities room. My intel shows this is where she spends most of her time." "Why take the gamble when this might not even be who we're looking for?" I asked as I skimmed over the rest of the blueprints. "Well, according to my lead, it seems the place is heavily guarded and monitored, mostly at night. The security on the outside seems to be a bit more lax during the day. It also appears that Emily is the only patient in the facility. If that doesn't scream shady vampires, I don't know what does." "Yeah, that is weird," I replied. "Why would such a big facility only have one patient?" Nate answered, "They don't want anyone knowing whatever the hell it is they're doing to her in there. And by the looks of it, the activities room is in the center of the mental hospital, so we'll have to be extra careful. That room is probably the most guarded." "So, what is your lead for all this?" I asked after a while, trying to make small talk. "An old employee that used to work there. He's human and worked on the day shift. I found his post on an internet forum by chance, where he detailed his weird experiences while working there. He said there were only a few people on staff during the day that would take care of one single patient. They kept it dark inside the hospital. There were creepy guards stationed everywhere, and every once in a while, some of his co-workers would go missing. He managed to escape after he saw his friend get dragged away by a creature with very sharp teeth." "A vampire," I whispered under my breath. Nate drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. "That's what I'm hoping for. If there's vampires swarming the place, we'll know we hit the jackpot." "I don't get it," I said as I cupped the hand behind my head. "If you can control the vampires and get rid of them for a while, what exactly do you need me for? Sure, I can see their ages and everything, but you've made it this long without my help. I don't think I'll be able to help all that much." Nate sighed, disappointedly. "Henry, I won't be able to do this without you. Your ability It's more useful than you know." "Really?" I asked, not quite believing him. I mean, the kid has 3 years of vampire hunting experience under his belt, and I only just found out the truth about my ability. "Yeah, really," he chuckled. "Did you know that the older the vampire, the more powerful they become?" I messed with a hangnail on my finger absentmindedly. "No, I don't really know much about them, other than what I've seen from movies and stuff. Well, most lore in the media is wrong. I'll tell you that right now." My mind flashed back to Harley's body melting into the ground in a dark goo. A shiver crept up my spine at the memory. Clearly. "Anyway, Henry, my point is that if when we get in there and the place is crawling with vamps, your job is to direct me to the oldest ones so I can get rid of them. They're the ones we need to be on the lookout for. If you want to make it out alive, you'll do what I say, yeah?" I nodded my head in understanding. "Look for the oldest ones. Got it." Nate reached behind him suddenly, causing him to swerve in the road a little bit. A second later, there's a wooden stick in his hand that has been sharpened at the end. He handed it to me. "Is this a wooden stake?" I asked incredulously. He shrugged his shoulders. "I said most of the lore is incorrect. Not all of it. One hit to the heart with one of these puppies and they'll explode into dust." "Thanks." "What? You didn't think I would send you in there alone without protection, did you?" I didn't say anything as I looked my new weapon over, inspecting it. It was a simple weapon really. It wasn't too heavy, and I had a good grip on it with my hands. It was the thought of actually destroying one of these monsters that made me uneasy. I'd never done it before. Harley was going to leave me in that alley, but Nathan was the one that sent her back to her death spot or whatever. Either way, I was in no serious danger then. Nate noticed my look of unease. "Hey," he said. "We're going to be fine, alright? We're going to rescue Emily and get out of there unscathed. We're the chosen few, remember?" "Yeah," I said, feeling a little more confident in myself. "We're the chosen few." Nate turned down a dirt road that we rode for about 3 miles before the trees on the left side of the road cleared up, revealing a large meadow with a magnificently built mansion right in the middle. It was Greco-Roman style and reminded me of the White House. The whole property was surrounded by 6-foot-high metal fencing with barbed wire on top. We passed a big sign that read, "Marvelous Maddie's Mental Hospital Institution" in big yellow letters. There was a smiley face graphic on the upper right corner that also looked like a sun. The van slowly skidded to a stop as we reached the gated entrance. There were 2 guards stationed out front on either end of the gate. They held rifles in their hands. They were just regular humans, from what I could tell. One guard was 27 years old and the other was 38, respectively. "Don't say anything. Act normal," Nate instructed as he started to roll down the driver's side window. "State your business," Guard 1 demanded. Nate leaned down on the side of the vehicle to hand the man a card. I have no idea what it said on it. Nonchalantly, he went, "Just here for a routine delivery, sir." The guard looked at the card and scoffed before flicking it to the ground. "You're late." "Got stuck in traffic, sir. You know how it can be sometimes." Nate had a small smile on his lips. If he was nervous, he didn't look like it. A tense moment of silence passed before Guard 1 nodded to Guard 2. Guard 2 then pulled out some sort of scanning device. "Alright then," Guard 1 said as he took a step back. "We're just going to scan your load to confirm." Whoa, what? As far as I knew, the back of his van was empty and had no boxes. I thought Nate went to go pick it up because he rented it from somebody, not an actual delivery service. Nate shot me a testing glance as he noticed the panicked look in my eye. He shot me a look that said, "Don't do anything stupid." I tried to refocus my nervous energy and redirected it towards my hands. I clutched in the armrest until my knuckles went white, preparing to be shot to death. A chime sound rang out and Guard 2 walked back into position. His scanner thing was glowing green at the end. Guard 1 slapped the side of the truck twice before saying, "You're good to go." Guard 2 pressed the button and the gates slid open for the delivery van to drive through. Relief flooded my body as Nate drove down an even windier road down to the mental hospital. "Like I told you, Henry, Nate chuckled. This is exactly what they were expecting. A sudden pit formed in my stomach. I didn't like the implications that were behind that statement. It was then that I realized Nate could be one scary hell of a dude. 2 orderlies waited for us inside the delivery bay when we pulled up. One was a guy and the other was a girl. They both wore white scrubs. I quickly slipped my wooden stake on the inside of my khaki jumpsuit when I got a look at their ages. Guy on your left is a vampire. He's 150. I whispered to Nate as we got out of the vehicle. He gave a curt nod to let me know he heard me. Well, he started as he opened the back of the van up, revealing several boxes of medical supplies. It's been a long drive for the both of us. Mind showing the way to the bathroom? The girl nodded her head politely as she pointed down a nearby corridor. The restrooms are down that hall. Should be the last door on the left. Nate and I thanked the woman as we briskly made our way deeper into the facility. Why didn't you dust that vamp? I asked. Because he wasn't alone, he answered. What if he kills her? He won't, Nate reassured me. Not if he doesn't want to bring in all of those boxes by himself. I nodded and we continued our way past the bathrooms and to the activities room. The hospital itself was pretty barren. It was eerily quiet except for the buzzing of the luminescent lights installed in the ceiling. That only added to the creepy ambience. Nate's lead wasn't lying about them keeping it dark in there. As we got closer to the middle of the building, lights became sparse, and every window we passed was covered with thick blackout curtains. We were definitely in the right place. Every now and then, we would encounter a stray bloodsucker or two. I would yell the age of the vampire I saw and then point. Nate would do his thing and the vampire would melt into the ground, being sent back to the spot they died and became a vampire. If I remember the blueprints correctly, we should have been down the hall from the activities room. Nate stopped me suddenly, his hand pushing my chest back. Something doesn't feel right, he told me. What do you mean? This all feels too easy. We've only come across a couple of vamps, and our prize is right down the hall behind a single door. You're right, I confirmed as a pit started to form in my stomach. This didn't seem right at all. Not if they were guarding the one person that could actually kill a vampire once and for all. Get in the activities room and check on Emily, Nate said as he placed a hand on my shoulder. I'm going to go check things out. Before I could protest the split up and go along with him, Nate was already halfway back to the corridor entrance we had just come from. I grabbed the stake I'd safely tucked away and armed myself with it as I cautiously made my way closer to the closed doors that should lead to the activities room. All I had to do was walk around a corner and I'd be there. With each step I took, the more this feeling of dread consumed me. Something bad was going to happen and Nate wouldn't be there to save me. I was about 10 paces away from my destination when out of nowhere, this older gentleman with salt and pepper hair stepped out from the corner. He looked like a butler as he had a handlebar mustache and was wearing a tailcoat suit and a pair of pristine white gloves on his hands. I took a step back as I saw his age. My eyes went wide as I read the number 750. That meant this guy had to have been alive during the goddamn Crusades. There you are, he smiled menacingly, fangs out and everything. We've been expecting you. Stunned, I launched towards the vampire, my stake at the ready, directing my aim towards his heart. I went in for the kill, but was suddenly thrown back by the man's immense strength. I crashed into a wall where I'm pretty sure I cracked a rib, or 3. He was 10 times stronger than Harley was back in the alley. I tried to pick myself up to continue to fight, but the 750-year-old butler vampire was faster and threw me back onto the ground. I reached for my wooden stake, but he stomped on it and crushed it to pieces. He stomped on my hand too, for good measure. He looked down at me with this fake look of pity on his face. I've always despised you, chosen few. You always did fuck with my fun, he snarled in my ear. His hand was firm on my shoulder, keeping me to the ground. It'll be fun to watch you die. You can't bite me, I strained out painfully, He chuckled. "Oh, need not worry, young chosen one. I've got just a remedy for that little problem." Grams reached behind his tailcoat and pulled something out. A metallic click filled my ears as he cocked a revolver. My stomach did a backflip. Another sinister smile filled his face. "Say goodnight." I clutched my eyes closed and prepared for the end. Where was Nate when I needed him, huh? What, I have to get stuck with the lame power to see people's ages? All it did in the end was let me know that I was going to die by the hands of a very old, very powerful vampire. I was useless. My existence was useless. This was it. This was the bitter end. Me cowering on the floor as a vampire laughed maniacally as he readied to shoot me to death. "No, this is not the end." A voice, not my own, screamed in my mind. Suddenly, an intense electrical feeling coiled through my spine. My body went rigid, then into overdrive, and I managed to stand up. This intense feeling flooded my veins. It was a mixture of energy, anger, and power, a feeling I'd never felt before. It was almost intoxicating. He tried to come at me again, but another jolt of electricity shot through me, and Grams the vampire was stuck in place. I looked down at my hand. Out in front of me, like I was using the force. "No," he said in disbelief. He tried to make a run for it, but was unable to move from the spot I'd glued him in. Instinctively, I flicked my wrist. With a sickening crunch, every bone in the man's body shattered into a million pieces. His deformed body skin shell fell to the well-polished linoleum floors. It's like right as he hit the floor, he started turning to black smoky goo. I barely had time to process what just happened before I was alerted to another's presence. "What the?" another vampire said as he peeked around the same corner Grams had come from. He looked much younger than the other vampire with long blonde hair and blue eyes. He gave off surfer dude vibes. My hand flexed out again suddenly, directed at the 400-year-old vampire who'd just witnessed me kill one of his kind. "Boss, is everything alright?" I heard another vamp say from further down the hall. The vampire in front of me stared at me with scared wide eyes. "Everything's fine," I whispered, a hastily formed idea filling my mind. "Go back to your post." "Everything's fine," he said back, repeating me. "Go back to your post." "If you say so, boss," the other vampire said, as the sound of his retreating footfalls filled the hallway. "This is not the droid you're looking for," I said, quoting Star Wars as I waved my hand in front of the vampire's face. He blinked lazily before walking back to where he came from. I stood there for a second, my brain trying to wrap itself around everything that just happened in the past 3 minutes. The scorch spot left of the 750-year-old vampire I just kinda killed was something for sure. But most importantly, if Nate was the only chosen one who could control vampires, what in the hell did I just do? "Get it together, Henry," I said to myself, slapping some sense back into me. "Remember the mission. Fight now, think later." I checked my surroundings for more vamps. I quickly pressed myself against the wall as another set of footsteps descended from the end of the adjacent corridor. Sneaking a peek, I found an orderly carrying a metal platter with a small styrofoam cup, some pills and a sandwich on it. The girl's age read only 20, but I was on edge. She still could have been a fledgling vampire for all I know. Technically, anybody in the double digits could be a vampire. They just aren't super mega old like most I've encountered so far were. I couldn't trust anyone. She looked friendly enough with her long brown hair tied back into 2 French braids and eyes which radiated kindness. She continued walking, staring down the activities room's door absent-mindedly. I could only guess who the pills and food were for. Taking a gamble with what little essence of a plan my brain had cooked up, I revealed myself right as the orderly stopped in front of the double doors that led into the most important room in the building. "Hey there." She stared at me with wide doe eyes, pressing her lips into a small line. Obviously, I'd caught her off guard and startled her. Can I help you, sir? She stuttered out. How did you get in here? I shot her a nervous, toothy smile. Listen, I'm real sorry to do this. You look like a real nice lassie. You really do, but... I wound my fist back, ready to knock her lights out, when I noticed the scared look on her face. A few thoughts crossed my mind. How many punches to the face would it actually take for it to go down? How much pain and damage had to be done before she was knocked unconscious? I was already hesitant to hit the woman in the first place, but it was necessary to my plan. Quickly, I changed my plan to what I thought was a slightly less brutal one. Hey, what's that over there? I asked as I pointed behind her. Following my lead, the orderly twisted her head to look at the empty corridor behind her. As much as I didn't want to get violent, especially with a woman, I needed her out of the picture, and her clothes. While she was still turned away from me, I lunged forward and took the tray out of her hand and set it haphazardly on the floor. Then, in her stunned confusion, I grabbed her shoulder and twisted her so her back was to my front, then put her in a chokehold. I felt dirty as I covered her mouth with my hand to keep her screams muffled. She squirmed in my grasp and clawed at my arms, desperately trying to get me off her. Unfortunately for her, I was stronger, and within a minute or two, she was out. I didn't put enough pressure on her throat and do too much damage, but she would be out for a little bit and wake up with a sore throat and a nasty-looking bruise. Looking around to make sure the coast was clear, my eyes landed on the only door in the hallway. I grabbed the orderly's wrists and quickly dragged her surprisingly heavy body closer to the door. I crossed my fingers and toes, praying that this door to whatever room lay behind it was unlocked. Mara blessed me with some good luck, as after a quick jiggle of the doorknob, the door popped open, revealing a small janitorial closet. I gently disrobed the nurse out of her scrubs, not looking at or touching anything because I'm not a perv, and set my delivery driver costume neatly on her torso. If she woke up in there, at least there'd be something for her to change into. I did a quick costume change, then grabbed a broomstick and stuck it under the doorknob after gingerly kicking the orderly's legs inside the closet. The white scrubs the orderlies had to wear must have been unisex or something, because they fit surprisingly well. They felt light and breathable, like silk pajamas. My only problem was that I had 2 feet on the other girl, so the pants went up a little past my ankles. Anything, though, was better compared to the tightness of the delivery driver costume. Collecting myself, I swept some hair out of my face and ran my hand through my hair. Hopefully, I won't need to do any more evil deeds for the rest of the day. I scooped the metal tray off the ground and walked towards the activities room's doors. The small golden plaque mantled above the wooden double doors that read, "Activities Room," only confirmed I was in the right place. I hadn't gotten close enough to the doors before to see that plaque, so it was nice to know I hadn't royally fucked up, and I was actually worthy of being on Nate's team. Now, all I had to do was go in there and rescue the last chosen, so our team could go and kick some vampire ass. Taking a deep breath in, I shifted my left hand under the middle of the tray and knocked softly on the door 3 times with my other hand. "Hello?" I asked softly, not wanting to startle whoever was in the room. "Is anyone in there?" I was about to knock again after not hearing anything, but I paused when an even softer voice said from the other side of the door, "Come in." I opened the door and realized why they sent human orderlies in there instead of vampires. The activities room was a huge open space with one wall basically being floor-to-ceiling windows. In contrast to the dark corridor on the other side of the large oak double doors, bright light from the early afternoon sun lit the activities room up like a Christmas tree. There was a brown leather couch set and coffee table in the middle of the room. A large pool table was in the back left corner, adjacent to a ping pong table in the back right corner. In front of the wall of windows was a large wooden easel and half-painted canvas. Next to it was a plastic foldable table full of art supplies. Paint brushes, colorful tubes of acrylic paint, oil paints, and a watercolor palette were littered all over the surface of the table. a stack of empty canvases of all different shapes and sizes laid in the corner. Next to it was another stack of paintings, all with similar compositions, but they were facing the ceiling, so I didn't get a real good look at them. The canvas itself was full of different vibrant shades of green, yellows, pinks, and purples. Even though it wasn't finished, I could tell it was a painting of a garden that I'd visited before. The Garden of Mara. It was then that I noticed all the paintings hanging around the room. They were all almost identical, except put together, the canvases showed a greater painting altogether. It was almost a full panorama of the pavilion that sat in the middle of the garden. Emily grabbed an apron with a million paint splatters covering it and tied it around her front. A little name tag reading Emily was pinned to it. Emily picked up a white plastic palette and started to paint again. "You're not Gloria," she said in a slow, monotone voice. I set the tray I was carrying down on the glass coffee table, then went back and locked the doors. I couldn't risk any vampiric interruptions. "Gloria is feeling a bit under the weather at the moment, so they sent me." I lied. Something felt off about this whole situation. As I got a better look at Emily, I had a sneaking suspicion why. She wore a light gray sweatsuit under her apron. Her blonde hair was tied back into a messy bun. A million freckles were speckled all over her rosy cheeks and nose. Her eyes were glassy and gray with a far-off look in them. Immediately, I could tell she wasn't fully there. I grabbed the pill cup that sat in between the styrofoam cup of water and sandwich on the tray I'd brought in. The cup contained 4 small white round tablets and 1 long light blue pill. None of them had the standard imprint codes that identified what the medicine contained. Just what kind of drugs were they giving her? When I looked back up after concluding my examination of the pills, Emily was standing in front of me, her palm held out to me expectantly. "My pills?" she asked with a raised eyebrow as she stared at the small cup in my hands. My eyes dotted between the pills and her glassy gray eyes. "Why don't we try something different today?" I offered her the sandwich and cup of water instead. She shrugged her shoulders, indifferent to the change of routine, and graciously took the water and chugged it. She ignored the sandwich and went back to her easel. "Do you know your name?" I asked after dumping the pills in the sink that was used to wash the paintbrushes. I turned the faucet on and watched the drugs dissolve in the water and flow down the drain. Emily said absentmindedly as she continued to stroke her paintbrush against the canvas. She paused and then turned to me and pointed at her name tag. "This thing says my name is Emily. Who else would I be, silly?" She then continued to paint the canvas, ignoring my existence as she got in the zone. I took another look at all the paintings around the room. "What are you painting?" I asked, already knowing the answer. It took Emily a minute to formulate an answer, like she was trying to find the right words to say. "Home, I think. I know I felt safe there. Warm and loved. I felt at home there." Home? That's an odd way to look at the Garden of Mara. But then again, when I think back to when I visited in my dreams, it could be described similarly to how Emily saw it. It was definitely a safe and comfortable space. No wonder Wesson, the god of death, wanted back in so badly. Emily waved her brush around a large blank spot in the middle of the canvas. "You see right there? This is where Milady will go. I'm not so good at painting people, so I'm going to do her last." After hearing Emily's explanation, the once white blob in the middle of the canvas resembled the outline of a woman. By the outline and with deductive reasoning, I concluded that Emily was talking about the goddess of life, Mara. It seems like she didn't know her name either, since she referred to her as Milady. "You're a good artist," I said, marveling at all the artwork Emily had created. "Your paintings are beautiful." Emily continued stroking her paintbrush along the canvas. Currently, she was touching up a section of pink flowers I couldn't place the name of. Instead of thanking me for the compliment, Emily started airing her grievances to me. "They won't let me paint a mural on the walls. and only let me use the canvases. Those only let me create windows. If I could paint my mural, it would be like I was back there. I nodded my head and made a non-committal to show I was listening to her. Emily then pointed to the stack of painted canvases. Those are my failures, too ugly to even be seen. The only good thing about them is the practice I got. One day though, despite them, I'll paint my perfect mural on the walls. One day, I'll go back home. Even though she was drugged out of her mind, I admired Emily's determination and outlook on life. She had this indescribable aura about her that made me realize why Mara chose her. I would sense it would be even greater if she was at full mental capacity. I asked her one final set of questions before I determined it was high time we got out of there. Emily, do you remember anything other than the garden? Do you know where you are right now? Why you're here? She set her paintbrush down and turned to face me again. Emily looked up to the ceiling as she tried to remember. The glossy look in her eyes deepened as she seemed to be looking beyond the ceiling at something incredibly far away. It looked like she was about to cry as she breathed in a faint gasp of air. I need to finish my painting. Emily? I said as I got off the couch and grabbed her shoulder. She shrugged me off and went into a trance-like state. She wouldn't answer any more of my questions and just continued to paint. Suddenly, a loud bang came from the locked double doors. Emily didn't seem to mind it, but I readied myself for another vampire attack. Another loud bang came from the door. I grabbed one of Emily's spare paint brushes and broke the wooden tip handle off, making a makeshift wooden stake. If earlier had been a fluke and I really couldn't control vampires, I didn't want to be empty-handed when facing another fanged bloodsucker. One third and final bang came from the doors before they burst open. I put myself in a fighting stance, bracing for the vampiric army I expected to storm through those doors and rip me to shreds. Instead, a disheveled Nate stood out of breath, holding his side. "Nate?" I shouted in relief, throwing the makeshift stake across the room and enveloping him in a tight hug. I thought he might have become vampire chow by now. Boy, was I glad to see he was alright. The memories of my pressure vampire encounter and the implications that came with it got pushed to the back burner with how excited I was not to be alone again. Still, a feeling of unease coursed through me. Something was telling me to err on the side of caution. I decided not to divulge the new developments of my abilities to Nate. "Oh, hello," Emily said in that same quiet and mousy tone when she first let me in the activities room, addressing Nate. She went back to painting as if nothing ever happened. He had this complete look of surprise and awe on his face as he looked me dead in the eyes and pushed me off of him. He analyzed the situation and kept looking between me, Emily, and the paintings all over the walls. Nate quickly broke his shock and looked behind his shoulder. He then closed the double doors he'd kicked open. "Quick, help me push the sectional over here," he ordered as he raced towards the largest and heaviest couch in the room. Following Nate's orders, I grabbed one end of the heavy sectional and helped him carry it to the doors. We pushed it right under the door handles so it would be difficult to open the door from the other end. Just then, a bang came from the other side. Then another. "Care to explain?" I said as I grabbed my makeshift stake again and eyed the doors like they were going to explode open any minute. "Pissed off a couple of vampires. They followed me here. They probably brought reinforcements as well." A sarcastic, "Great," slipped out of my mouth as I rolled my eyes. "What's with her?" Nate asked, gesturing to Emily. "Drugged to high hell. I doubt she even knows she's a chosen, much less how to use her ability in the state she's in." "Great," Nate said, copying my sarcastic tone from earlier. "Are those paintings of the garden?" "Yes, she thinks it's home," I answered. "It will be home to all of us if we don't do something," Nate shouted. I had an epiphany. "We can't take them all, just me and you. We need Emily and her ability to get rid of them for good. If I can somehow get her lucid, then we might have a fighting chance." Nate took a cautious step back from the door and started looking for an alternative escape route. "How do you plan to do that?" I said, thinking out loud as I patted myself down, trying to find something that would do just what I needed it to. My hand landed on my pocket, and a crazy idea popped into my head. It was crazy enough it might just work. With this, I said as I pulled my EpiPen out of my pocket and held it up like it was our saving grace. Remember when I said I carry it with me in my pocket everywhere I go? Just as I announced my plan, Nate's eyes landed on the wall of windows. I don't know, Henry. Don't you think maybe she's been drugged for a reason? Let's just break the window, get to the van, and let her detox on the way back to the motel. Yes, I do think she was drugged for a reason, I answered, looking at Emily. That reason is what is going to get us out of here alive. I dismissed Nate's plan and readied the EpiPen. A boost of adrenaline was hopefully just the thing to break Emily out of her drug-induced trance. Do whatever it is you think will work then, Nate said, annoyed as he punched one of the window panes, trying to break it. Meanwhile, I'll be over here waiting and ready to save your ass again. When his punch didn't break the glass, Nate tried to kick it. Hey, what are you doing? Emily yelled in protest as I took the paintbrush out of her hand and spun her around. My one hand was wrapped around her waist, and the other was at the ready with my EpiPen. Don't worry, Emily. It'll pinch and sting for a little bit, but then everything will be just fine, I said, reassuringly. She looked me deep in the eyes, seemingly understanding what I was telling her. Right as I jabbed the EpiPen in her thigh, she didn't even flinch or register that she'd just been stabbed with a tiny needle. I stuck the empty pen cartridge back in my pocket. I waited for something, anything to happen to Emily. She just stood there like some kind of a zombie statue. A minute passed, and her eyes still remained just as cloudy as before. An intense bang came from the window behind us. Nate had picked up a love seat and was currently attempting to use the legs to break the windows. It was a little effective as a small crack in the glass had formed. A little help here? Nate grunted as he threw the chair at the window. Give me a minute, I yelled desperately. Emily still had that long far-off look in her eyes. I looked between her and Nate, who was still assaulting the windows with living room furniture. Another idea popped into my mind. It was a long shot, but it could work. If it didn't, then I'd help Nate finish breaking the window, which now had multiple cracks in its glass. Still holding Emily's waist, I pulled her even closer to mine. Our faces were mere inches apart, and I could feel the air coming out of her nose on my cheek. I looked into her gorgeous gray eyes one more time before I shut mine and pushed my lips into hers. It was a short and sweet kiss, but at the same time, it felt electric, like a million lightning bolts danced across my skin. I felt a sudden change in her body language as I pulled myself off of her and opened my eyes. The aura she emitted earlier had increased tenfold, and the look on her face was a scary one. Her once glossy eyes were clear as day with heavily dilated pupils. They were somehow a darker, more alive shade of gray than before. Her cheeks were blushed a deep red, and a nasty frown was on her lips. Emily scowled at me. A sudden spark flashed in her eyes as her anger increased, and she slapped me across the face. I took a surprised step back and rubbed my sore cheek. What the hell is wrong with you? She turned around and rested her hands on the easel. She looked back at me with a menacing look as she wiped my kiss residue off of her lips with her sleeve. I stepped forward to try and explain myself, but another spark lit in her eyes and her palms glowed an amazing hue of red. Then suddenly, the easel erupted into flames. Emily screamed as she lurched back, accidentally falling into me. She pushed me off of her as she looked at the big flaming easel in the corner. Emily's scream grabbed Nate's attention off the window and over to us. Holy shit, he said, dropping the chair in his hands. Her halfway completed painting burst and sent hot embers flying throughout the room. One landed on the back of my hand, instead of an intense burning pain shooting through my skin. I felt nothing. I watched in awe as the ember burned brightly on my hand before eventually dying out and crumbling to ash. Emily looked in awe as I scraped the ash off my hand and whipped the debris off on my white scrubs. That didn't hurt, I said, amazed. We're immune to each other's abilities, Nate said as he gestured to a bunch of embers that landed on his own skin and clothes. They all fizzled out and crumbled to ash. Even Emily was immune, but that was a given since she is the one who caused the fire to begin with. Nate looked over at the sectional which had small flames littered throughout its upholstery as if to prove his point even more. "What the hell is going on?" she screamed as she looked down at her hands, scared of herself. That glassy look from earlier returned as she seemed to remember something. "Mom? Dad? What did I do?" I grabbed Emily's shoulder and rubbed it gently. This seemed to break her out of her trance, and she looked up to me. "Hey, it's okay. See? We're fine. Let's all calm down and focus on getting out of here." She wiped a tear out of her eye, and a determined look crossed her face as she nodded in agreement. "This window is about to crumble. Just one more hit and we're out of here," Nate yelled as he picked up the same love seat from earlier. "No!" Emily and I shouted at the same time, lunging for Nate, trying to stop him. The one thing you never want to do, especially in a house fire, is open any windows or doors to the room that's on fire. It's called the fire triangle since there are 3 things needed for a raging fire to start: heat, fuel, and oxygen. There was plenty of fuel in the room with the wooden easel, all the canvases and various wooden brushes and furniture littered throughout the room. The heat from the first fire was already going if Nate managed to break the window. Then the overabundance of oxygen that would flow into the room would tip the scales and cause the fire to burn more and potentially cause an explosion. Emily and I were late in our warning as Nate had already thrown the chair with all of his might. First, the sound of cracking glass filled the room before the glass shattered completely. Nate braced himself, and I grabbed Emily and shielded her in my arms. The sound of hot wind rushing next to me rang in my ears as a loud explosion echoed through the room. Something large crashed into my back, causing a rippling pain throughout my entire body. Emily fell out of my grasp due to the hard impact. The wind got knocked out of me, but I would be fine. I looked up, and everything was covered in flames. It was weird standing in the middle of a burning blaze and not dying. I managed to find Emily again, and Nate joined back up with us. Nate let me use him as a crutch, and the 3 of us left the activities room for the last time. The couch we used to block the door had been blown to smithereens. The vampires that had been piled against the backside of the door didn't stand a chance. As we left, one vampire who had their lower half torn off in the blast crawled down the hall for help, his organs leaking out and leaving a black blood trail behind him. He reached out for us, hissing and baring his teeth, but he was too weak to do anything. His skin started glowing brightly before he disappeared altogether. He was only 102 years old. "Gnarly," Nate said. "What was that thing?" Emily gulped. I forgot for a second that she was out of the loop. I then remembered the orderly from earlier and raced over to the closet and locked her in. I removed the broomstick and her body fell out when I opened the door. She must have regained consciousness and put the delivery driver outfit on, but passed out again after the explosion. It looked like the force of the blast caused a whole bunch of cleaning supplies to fall off the shelves and onto her. I checked her pulse. She was alive, but barely. I grabbed who I think Emily called Gloria and slung her over my shoulder. Another roar of fire shot out of the activities room door, singeing the hair off of Gloria's arm as I just managed to dodge it. 2 things became apparent at that moment. 1, humans could be affected by Emily's flames. 2, the fire was now spreading out of the activities room and spreading down the corridor to the rest of the hospital. "Human?" Nate asked as I hurriedly hobbled over back to the group. I nodded my head. "We need to get the other humans here to safety. There's at least another one here somewhere. Nate, do you know where the others are?" He nodded his head. When we didn't go back to the van, the Vams figured we were up to no good. They gathered all the humans as hostages in the cafeteria. There were 6 of them, but as far as I know, 2 of them were drained and turned. "Wait, they can turn other humans?" I asked, bewildered at such a possibility. "Vamps? As in vampires?" Emily added in incredulously. "Yes," Nate answered both of our questions at the same time. "Just who the hell are you guys?" she asked, looking for answers, trying to make sense of everything. Nate and I shot each other a look before answering her question in unison. We're Mara's chosen few. Emily blinked blankly at us, with an even more confused expression than before. The fucking what now? Who the hell is Mara? I sighed as Nate rolled his eyes. I'll explain once we get back to the van. Alive and all in one piece, yeah? Nate shot me a look. I put my free hand up defensively. A trio of vampires suddenly rounded the corner and raced towards us. The oldest was a 260-year-old girl that looked no older than 16. The other two vampires were older men, both 99 years old. They looked to be in their late 40s. The middle one is 260, I shouted to Nate as I set Gloria down on the floor, leaning her body against the wall. I had a choice. Try to use my newfound power and dust the oldest vamp and expose myself in the process. Or let Nate handle it and shield Gloria's body from further harm. Mara knows how much I've scarred this poor woman already. The grip around my makeshift stake tightened as I prepared to go on the defensive. There's no way, Emily shouted in disbelief. She's just a kid. The three vampires all bared their fangs at the same time, seemingly offended by Emily's judgment. Who are you calling a kid, lady? I'm older than you think. Nate looked back to Emily and scoffed at the irony. Yeah, and you just set that room on fire with your bare hands. The teen vampire lunged towards Emily. She jumped back in fright as a defensive small blast of fire shot out from the palm of her hand. Emily shrieked in shock and stared at her hands like her appendages were alien to her. The vampire kid dodged the attack and kept her distance. Good, that's good, Emily. Keep that up, Nate said, jumping in front of Emily to protect her. Henry, you take care of Lefty. The girl is mine. Em, just try your best. I nodded my head before jumping into the action. The vampire dude on the left hissed and threw a punch my way. I dodged, using my momentum to push myself around to his back. He quickly turned around, but I was quicker and jabbed the end of the paintbrush into his chest as hard as I could. He let out one last scream as his body burst into a cloud of dust. Once all the ash settled, it quickly melted into a familiar pile of black goo before seeping into the floor. I flipped the brush in my hand, blowing the sharpened handle like it was a gun I just fired. I looked at Emily and winked. Piece of cake. She rolled her eyes and muttered, gnarly, under her breath as she looked at the scorch mark left on the floor. Suddenly, I was knocked off my feet and was pinned against the wall. I shouldn't have let my guard down as the other 99-year-old vampire had taken advantage of my loss of focus. He pressed my head into the wall so hard it felt like my skull was about to crack. He grabbed my makeshift stake out of my hand and jabbed it into the back of my shoulder. I cried out in agony as a hot burning sensation shot through my shoulder and down my spine. Pathetic, the vampire whispered into my ear. I readied myself to grab a mental hold over the vampire and break every bone in his body for what he did to me. However, I didn't get the chance because, before I knew it, the vampire was engulfed in flames, disintegrating right in front of me. Behind the smoking pile of ash was Emily, who had a wild glint in her eye. Thanks, I muttered out, using my non-injured hand to inspect the damage done to my shoulder. When I brought my hand back to look at it, a nice smear of blood welcomed me. Emily let out a breathless laugh. No problem. Seeing the blood on my hand, she rushed over and started tending to me. All while this was happening, Nate was having a showdown with the female vampire. Nate stuck his hand out, aiming his focus towards the girl. Using her small and nimble frame to her advantage, she moved just fast enough to evade Nate's grasp. She progressively got closer and closer to where she was eventually able to land a blow on Nate. The girl punched him so hard, his head flew back with enough force to give him a concussion. He fell to the floor after being knocked back a few feet from the force of the blow. A small stream of blood trickled down of Nate's nose. His nose crinkled in pain and he spit out a mixture of blood and saliva in the vamp's direction. I lunged for the remaining vampire, only to stop in my tracks as an intense pain shot through my shoulder. Emily pulled me back, still trying to fix a stray piece of cloth to my shoulder as a bandage. "Nate?" I called out worriedly. He coughed before managing to pick himself up. "I'm fine. You won't be after I'm done with you," the teen said with a giddy laugh. Nate steadied himself as the vampire returned to her same antics as before. Nate knew her fighting style better now and anticipated her next move. She went for his left, but he dodged and spun to the right. She corrected herself quickly, but not fast enough. Nate was finally able to take control over her body. The girl struggled and grunted, trying to free herself from his grasp, but to no avail. Like out of The Exorcist or something, the vampire teen started to float up in the air, by Nate's hand no doubt. She yelped as her right arm bent out at an unnatural angle. Her left arm was next to go. She screamed in agony as all 10 of her fingers snapped in all different directions. I winced at the sounds her body was making. "Don't like it, do you?" Nate sneered, wiping residual blood off of his nose. Despite the obvious pain the girl was enduring, she still had the nerve to look down upon us. Please, I've suffered through worse. Give it your best shot, chosen one." Nate narrowed his darkened eyes as he smirked at the challenge. "You asked for it." In one loud crack, the girl's body twisted and turned every which way. The vampire let out a death roar as Nate closed his hands together, causing her body to implode, spewing burning black gunk everywhere. The room's ambience changed. An eerie feeling settled over the hall as the crackle of the fire roared, drowning all other sound out, slowly starting to spread, leaving a trail of sizzling charred wood in its wake. "Fuck, we have to get out of here," I said, clutching my shoulder. Emily pointed at Gloria. "We can't just leave the others." "We're not," I told her. "Come on, we have to get to the cafeteria quickly. This blaze is going to get out of control soon." Nate yelled as he ran to Gloria and scooped her up in his arms. Recalling the blueprints Nate had forced me to study, I led the charge to the large dining room. I was in front while Emily was behind me, sandwiched in between were Nathan and Gloria. "We're going to have to fight," Nate shouted as we rounded a corner. He snuck a glance behind him to the more inexperienced one of us. Although I was in front, it was Nate who really led us. "We don't really know how it'll look in there, how powerful some of those vamps will be. Henry, you're injured, but you should be able to help get the humans to safety. I'll charge in and distract the vamps, while Emily covers anyone that tries to come at you with the survivors. Sounds like a plan?" "I can't think of anything better," I replied with a strained grunt. The pain in my shoulder was causing me to start feeling a little lightheaded. I pushed myself to keep moving further. There were people depending on us. On me. Emily gave a curt and understanding nod. "I'll do my best." A silent understanding nestled between us as we finally reached the cafeteria. Were we ready? No, not really. I was tired and exhausted from fighting. I wanted nothing more than to soak in a hot bath and take a nap. I could tell Nate and Emily felt the same way. I gave one last look behind me before putting on a brave face and barging in. As soon as the doors burst open, Nate handed Gloria off to me. "Get the rest somewhere safe," he yelled. "Big guy in the corner," I said, examining the room. 748. With my intel, Nate got to work. They had been expecting our attack. When we barged in, some of the more experienced vampires were tasked with blocking the exit, so it wouldn't be as easy for me to get the hostages out. I needed to find an alternate exit. In total, there were 7 vampires, including the 2 that had just turned. One was the girl from the delivery bay. Christ, she was only 23 years old. The other was a taller and muscular guy that was 34. Out of the other older vampires, the youngest of them was 444. You already know how old the oldest was, about the same age as the one I accidentally murdered. Great. The hostages were all gathered on top of those foldable tables you find in a school cafeteria. There were 4 humans, 5 including Gloria, all orderlies. There were 3 girls and a guy. Each one was assigned a vampiric bodyguard of their very own. They looked petrified. While Nate wrestled with the oldest vampire in the corner and Emily struggled with the two at the door, I brought Gloria over to what I had deemed the safest place in the room, the window. The blackout curtains were still drawn shut, so my main priority was trying to get rid of that. Maybe the sunlight from outside could take care of a couple vampires too. Just then, a loud thud came from outside the dark window. It went unnoticed by everyone except me. Nate was busy being thrown into a table, while the roar of Emily's fire distracted everyone else. I took a quick peek. A horrifying sight greeted me. The fire that had started in the activities room had spread outside the confines of the building. Part of the fire now engulfed half of the lawn surrounding the mental hospital. The sound I'd heard belonged to an old dead-looking oak that had fallen due to the conditions outside. It was partially aflame. The tree had fallen in a way where the branches blocked any and all direct sunlight from shining in. So that plan went out the window? Literally. However, it was still a viable escape route, seeing as there was plenty of space for a person to crawl out the window and make it to safety. But there wasn't much time. That tree was basically a giant piece of kindling. "Stop him!" one of the vampires shouted when I began tugging at the curtains, trying to rip them down. One of the fledgling vampires lunged at me. It was the dude. I let him tackle me. If I'd dodged, he would have gotten a clean shot at Gloria, who was still unconscious. I could handle a blow. I did have an ace up my sleeve after all. The deranged fledgling started trying to chomp down on my neck. Clearly, he hadn't gotten the memo yet. Wanting to make sure it wasn't a fluke, I flicked my wrist slightly, envisioning what I wanted to happen. That similar buzzing sensation washed over me. He went to move, but couldn't. He grunted again, but was physically stuck. It hadn't been a fluke or an off chance at all. I really could take control over vampires, just like Nate. In the chaos of the battle, I noticed Nate looking back at me before facing his adversary once more. In my anger, I snapped the fledgling's neck. I hurriedly pushed his body off of me, scrambling for my paintbrush and making it look like I stabbed him with it in case someone saw. The undead dead corpse quickly disintegrated into goo. With one last guard and the other vampires starting to get worn down, the human hostages were starting to get a little antsy. I took that as my cue to get back to work. With ease, the thick curtains and rot came crashing down after I tugged it with my good arm. A quick scan of the window showed it couldn't be opened from the inside. All that was left to do was find a way to break the glass. "What's taking so long, Henry?" Emily asked nervously. "Take your time," Nate said sarcastically, dodging another vampiric attack. "It's not like we're busy or anything." "I'm working on it," I shout back. I remember the paintbrush. If I applied the correct amount of pressure and angled it just right, the glass would shatter in one devastating blow. Just as I'm about to, something catches the corner of my eye. A pile of black goo in the middle of the floor. It hadn't been there before. A bubble rose from the substance. Then another. The puddle was growing bigger, taking the shape of something larger. "What the fuck is that?" I asked myself. They'll rise again at the spot where they first died and became a vampire. They come back. They always do. The fledgling was killed in this room, and I'm guessing in that very spot. It didn't take long before the goop looked more and more like the fledgling I just offed earlier, and boy did he look pissed. He managed to get the drop on me, immediately flying towards me. I'd never seen a vampire regenerate before, and it put me off kilter. The fledgling ended up tackling me into the window, where the glass smashed into smithereens. My upper body was hanging outside the window, while my legs kept me grounded inside. Welp, one problem solved at least. "Shit!" I screamed in agony as glass tore into my hands and arms. The fledgling then roared in my face as it readied itself to launch a relentless attack on my behalf. "A little help over here?" I added, trying to lean as far away from the creature as possible. The pain my body was in felt otherworldly, completely shattering my ability to focus on anything else. Otherwise, I would have crushed the fledgling into oblivion, brought him back, then crushed him again. A sudden blast of fire propelled the vampire off of me, leaving nothing except for a small pile of ash. I looked over at Emily, who currently resembled 11 in Stranger Things. From the looks of it, she was starting to get a better grasp on her powers. The two vampires that had been guarding the door were stuck in the middle of a large ring of fire. Their only choice was to stay in the circle or die trying to leave it. "Thanks," I said weakly as Emily helped pull me out of the window frame, carefully dusting pieces of glass off my clothes. I spit on the pile of fledgling ash. "It's not the first time I saved you. If things keep going the way they are, then it most certainly won't be the last." She winked and gave me a pitiful smile as she looked at my injuries. "I'll have to clean your wounds later." "Let's not forget who saved you in the first place," I chuckled, managing to stand up on my own 2 feet. "I don't think I have any more fight left in me. Can you take care of the others while I get the hostages out of here?" Emily looked at the large broken window behind me and scanned it. She seemingly deemed it a worthy escape route with a nod, before going over and taunting the 3 vampires by the hostages. I checked to see Nate's progress with the big guy. They were still struggling, but the vamp looked to be quickly getting tired out. A couple seconds later, Nate managed to find a weak spot, and the 748-year-old went flying into the ring of fire that Emily had created. Like a strike in bowling, all 3 vampires got knocked into the fire and perished immediately. Nate took a second to collect himself before aiding Emily. Once the hostages were no longer being guarded by vamps, I rushed over to them. It didn't take long to convince them to follow me over the window. They had seen us fighting their captors after all. With Nate and Emily covering me, I brought the horde of hostages over to the window. I wiped stray bits of glass and broken wood off the base so nobody would get caught up climbing through the window. I was just about to start helping people out when one of the lady orderlies pointing out the window. "Who's that?" I took a peek and noticed a feminine figure leaning against the dead bark of the tree. From the sheer shock, I was able to mentally grab hold of her. I was not expecting to see the familiar biker chick standing there. "What the?" Harley said, struggling to move. She peeked behind me and saw Nate engaged in battle, not paying any attention to her. Is this you?" "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't snap your damn neck right now," I demanded. Despite the position she was in, she still had the nerve to look smug. She scoffed and rolled her eyes, flashing a fangy smile. "Despite what you might think, not all of us asked to be turned into this. Not all of us want to be monsters." "Explain the other night then," I scoffed as bloody flashbacks filled my mind. Harley sighed. "I was having a bad day." She squeaked as I tightened my grasp on her. "I'm here to help you, idiot." I stared into her undead eyes, trying to gauge the validity of that statement. For all I knew, she was lying to me. I don't know why, but my gut feeling was telling me she wasn't. It was telling me to trust her. I released my grasp over her. "Then help me." Together, we helped the rest of the humans out of the window and to safety. Gloria was the first one out, since she was unconscious and the most vulnerable. The others helped me get her out of the window, seeing how injured I was. "Get them to safety," I told her when everyone was out. Harley nodded and with Gloria in her hands, rounded up the traumatized humans and took point from there. The sun had set by then, allowing her to leave the shady confines of the burning oak safely. I looked back to see Emily deep frying the last of the remaining vampires. A heavy mix of relief and exhaustion settled over me. Maybe it was the blood loss, or just knowing that the fight was finally over. But I passed out. The stinging sensation of peroxide being poured on my hand brought me back. Once the pain dulled enough, I realized I was in the back of the delivery van. It sounded like we were on the road. Emily was tending to my wounds. "He's awake!" she shouted over her shoulder to Nate. It looked like she'd made a DIY first aid kit out of a few medical supply boxes that had been left in the back of the van. I winced as she dabbed a cotton ball over the biggest cut on my hand. He shouted back, "He's alive, that's good." A couple of minutes passed as she finished bandaging me up. My hands, arm, and shoulder were all bandaged up tightly. The wounds I'd sustained during the battle were all cleaned and medicated. "Thanks," I said, sitting up. "It should be me thanking you, really," she told me as she packed up the medical supplies. "Thank you for what you did back there, getting me out of that place." "It was no problem," I said, waving my bandaged hand. "Anyone could do it." This garnered a chuckle from her. "Nate?" I yelled. "How far out are we from the motel?" "About 30 minutes, he answered. "That's a relief," Emily sighed. "I could use a nap." "We all could," Nate added. I shook my head in agreement. "Mind explaining to me what the hell all that was?" Emily asked. In the heat of everything else happening, I'd totally forgotten I'd promised to fill her in. "So, it turns out the three of us were chosen by the goddess of life, Mara, hence why we're called Mara's chosen few, and given these special abilities. Using these powers, our mission is to eradicate vampires, creatures created by the god of death, who wants all of his sister's creations to die horrible and painful deaths because she tricked them out of her garden." Emily scrunched her eyebrows together, creating a confused look on her face. "It's hard to wrap your head around, I know," I chuckled. "I just learned all this too." She took a second to try and process that information before asking another question. "How were we chosen?" "I'm not really sure, but the one common factor is that we all had near-death experiences. Nate was in a car accident, and I almost drowned. What was yours?" Emily chuckled ruefully. "I fell off a ladder. I'd been helping my dad do some work around the house, and he'd needed me to do something on the roof. A strong gust of wind caused the ladder to shake, throwing me off. I fell 30 feet and landed on my back." I winced in pain for her. That couldn't have been pleasant. "I was honestly surprised to wake up in the hospital," she continued. "I for sure thought I was a goner. Then after some intense physical therapy, I was able to walk again with a walker. I got to go home and continue healing. Then I was frustrated and in pain during a PT session and got mad at my dad, who was just trying to help. That's when I first used my powers. I accidentally set the house on fire. And it wasn't a tiny fire either. It was this large blaze, bad enough to get me put in that mental hospital." My heart bled for Emily. She seemed so hurt and traumatized retelling her story to me. She laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "Way to start my 20s off, am I right?" How long do you think you were in there?" I asked, remembering all this happened right after her 20th birthday. "A couple of weeks maybe? Months? My mind is all hazy from when I was there, so I'm not entirely sure." "Emily?" I said softly, grabbing her hand firmly. I didn't know how to deliver the news to her, but I had to. "You've been in that mental hospital for the better part of 4 years. You're 24 now." She looked shocked to learn that, as any normal person would be, learning that they lost 4 years of their life. A tear rolled down her cheek. Trying to comfort her, I put my hand on her shoulder and rubbed it gently. Suddenly, she grabbed my wrist. "Talk to me," she pleaded, staring me in the eyes. "About anything. It'll make me feel better." I obliged her, telling her my life story. I talked about the bar, Marty's, Gladys, anything and anyone I could think of. I even tried my best to catch her up on global events she'd missed. After a while, Emily opened up and started telling me more about herself. We traded life stories and experiences. It felt refreshing to see Emily in this new light. I actually kind of knew her now, and it turns out she's a lovely person. "Got any water up there?" she asked Nate. Crackling noises emanated throughout the van, and a second later, she was handed a large plastic water bottle. She took a swig, then held the bottle out to me. "Want some?" she offered. I declined. Watching the water slosh around in the bottle made me realize just how bad I had to pee. Emily shrugged before downing more than half the water bottle in a couple of gulps. She must have been really thirsty. I guess having the ability to summon fire at will dehydrates you pretty quickly. The van suddenly rolled to a stop. Nate banged on the roof of the vehicle. "We're here." "Thank God," I shouted as I opened the van's back doors. I'd never been more relieved to see a city motel in my life. A city motel with a bathroom. My bladder felt like it was about to burst, so I didn't wait up and grabbed my room key. After unlocking our room door, leaving it slightly ajar, I rushed to the single bathroom and did my business. I heard it click shut from the bathroom a minute later. After flushing and washing my hands, Nate greeted me when I opened the door. "Need to use the loo too?" I asked jokingly. I was met with a serious face, not a smile or a laugh. An uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. Nate lying about his ability suddenly came to the forefront of my mind. "I'm sorry," he said, sounding remorseful. I felt a sudden stinging pinch on my patch of forearm that wasn't covered in white medical bandages. I looked down to see a small red welt forming on my skin. Something small, sharp and black was sticking out of it. In Nate's hand was a pair of tweezers with a bee pinched between it. Its rapid wriggling slowed as the insect started to die. I looked at Nate confused, as pain and panic flooded my mind. He knows I'm allergic to bees, so why did he do that? Where the heck did he even get a bee from in the first place? My skin started to feel itchy. I pushed past Nate and stumbled about the motel room, panicking. I reached for the EpiPen in my pocket. I quickly jammed the device in my thigh, but the button wouldn't press down. That's when I realized it was empty. Then I remembered I'd used it to try to override the drugs in Emily's system. "Emily. Where's Emily?" I asked through gritted teeth. I sat down on one of the beds. My head felt fuzzy and light. "Relax, she's in the van sleeping." I slipped a mild sedative in the water. "Why?" was all I could think to ask as heat spread throughout my body. My throat was in the beginning stages of closing. I'd try to explain, give you my reasons. But what good would that do? "You'll be dead in a minute anyway," Nate said coldly, staring me in the eye. He then gently pushed my shoulder, causing me to fall on my back. I was too weak to move, too tired to say anything. All I could do was turn my head and watch Nate grab his things and quickly leave the room. At least he left the door open for someone to easily find my dead body. As an inky blackness encroached my vision, the last thing I saw was the delivery van pull out of the parking lot and speed away. I blinked slowly a couple of times, taking everything in. I'd been betrayed. I felt hurt and bitter, but also somewhat relieved. In the end, I'd found my purpose after so many years of searching. I fought the good fight, and I'd fought it hard. Sure, I had regrets. A lot of them actually, having trusted Nate being my biggest. But hey, at least I could die a content man knowing I got to have one big adventure, having saved one life out of it. At least I had done a little good in my life, right? My consciousness and subsequently my life slipped away from me. I woke up somewhere soft and warm. It smelled like my favorite floral scents, lilacs and lavender. When I picked myself up, I discovered I was in a place that was full of eternal beauty and overwhelmingly familiar. Like it was home, but also so unreal. Like it was a scene plucked right out of a fantasy novel. I was in the Garden of Mara. Sitting across from me on a smooth quartz bench was the lady of the garden herself. "Do not worry," she chuckled. "You're not dead. I've seen to that. Soon, you'll wake up good as new, as if that bee never stung you." I let out a breath of relief. If the goddess of life tells you you're going to live, you believe her. "Come, child." She patted the spot next to her on the bench. "We have much to discuss." "It seems I might have misjudged Nate," Mara said, tapping her pointer finger on her chin. I roared an incredulous laugh. "You think?" Mara glared at me with those powerful color-changing irises of hers. I snapped my mouth shut, remembering that I was talking to a goddess. The goddess who just saved my life. I cleared my throat. "Sorry." She gave me a nod, approving of my apology. "That was you, wasn't it?" I asked suddenly. In my head, right before I could control the vampires, just like Nate. Mara smiled and grabbed my hand, lightly patting the back of my palm. "You catch on pretty quickly. You're a very clever young man. You would have come to the conclusion on your own eventually. But when I figured something was wrong, all I did was simply give you a little push." I scrunched my eyebrows in confusion, not quite unpacking the revelation Mara was giving me. "What do you mean?" Mara leaned close and whispered in my ear. "This isn't the first I've had to nudge you in the right direction. And it isn't the first time we've had this conversation either, my dear." When I realized what she meant, it felt like my eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. She was referring to right after my near-death experience, the conversation we had before she kissed my forehead, and the dream in the hospital, how after I knew what my ability was. "Out of the three of you, Henry, you had the most potential. Your potential to do good in this world. It's why I chose you, the reason why I intervened in your death." It was all slowly starting to come back to me. That first time, back in the garden when I was younger, Mara explained everything to me. I was supposed to die in that pool. In an alternate reality, the EpiPen never made it into my hands. My mother finds my dead body floating in the pool with my throat all closed up. In an alternate reality, I ceased to exist. That same day, another chosen had died. In search of a new soul, she chose me like how she chose all her chosen ones, someone with potential teetering on the brink of death, someone to give a second chance at life. Ironic, since the whole reason I'm in this situation is because she refuses to give her brother another chance. She saw something in me that no one else saw, so Mara guided that EpiPen into my hands. In the hospital, she hated seeing me struggle, so she paid me a visit in my dreams and helped me out. I'm also remembering how she told me that nobody would believe me if I told them of my ability, which was so great to be remembering right now, and not during my formative years, the years where everyone thought I lied about everything and called me a freak. I shook the thought out of my head. Things are coming back to me, a lot of things, but I think there was something else you told me. What was it? It's something important. Mara put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed it gently. That, my child, would be your power, your true powers. I thought that Nate didn't tell you everything in that bar. In fact, he lied to you. She explained. Yes, you have the ability to see one's age, and Emily can set things ablaze with her hands, but Nate was telling you a half-truth. He can, as you've seen, manipulate vampires physically, but that's not all he can do. He explained to you that my chosen ones work like what you'd call a tag team, correct? I nodded my head. What does that have to do with his ability? Rather, abilities. I didn't know he had two. You all have multiple abilities, Mara informed me. Referring back to the tag team example, the three of you each have unique abilities that help you track down and dispose of vampires. Say all three of you were in a room with 30 other people, and one of them was a vampire. Nate, with his sense of smell, can detect that undead vampire. Flashbacks of the numerous times Nate would rub or scrunch his nose flashed in my mind. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, but now I know he was hiding his true ability from me. After giving me some time to let that information sink in, Mara continued. You, with your sight, can confirm who the vampire is, and Emily's fire manipulation will exterminate that vampire for good. But, as a safeguard for when you weren't all together, I gave you another gift, the ability to manipulate what little part of their soul, their life source, was left. Once the physical body was incapable of movement, the soul would travel back to its death spot, and buy you some time to get away. My mind was a whirlwind, information flying around in my head, trying to settle in a way that made sense. Everything I knew about Nate had been a lie, but yet everything seemed so clear now. I knew exactly what to say. Thank you. Thank you for telling me that. You're the first I've ever told of all this to. The first that I've let remember everything, Mara confessed while looking at her garden, a solemn expression plain as day on her face. I wonder what she was thinking about, looking so sad. If I'm the only one you've told, then how did Nathan know? Mara sighed as she straightened herself up and re-established eye contact with me. It seems my brother has involved himself in the matter, caused my own chosen one to turn his back on me. Mara let out a rueful chuckle. I don't know why or how he did it, but he must be up to no good. He's planning something, and I want to know what. Something doesn't feel right about this whole situation. I want to know too. Good. Then you'll help me? She asked. I nodded my head. Anything for you, my goddess. I owe you my life, twofold. A warm smile spread on her lips. Very well, Henry. It's about time I sent you back now. Mara then enveloped me in a tight bear hug. She had this air about her, both warm and inviting, and yet very intimidating. I hugged back, feeling oddly safe in her embrace. She softly whispered in my ear, sending a tingle down my spine. You know, little one, you and I are very alike. We both have had a very lonely and painful existence. I suppose in a way, that makes you my favorite. Before I could think of anything to say, Mara kissed my forehead. A warm and sleepy feeling enveloped me. Dark corners in my vision grew bigger and bigger. Before I knew it, my eyes were closed. The last thing I heard before sleep overtook me was, "It's about time I pay my brother a visit." My eyelids burst open. The dingy waterlogged roof of the motel greeted my vision. I was back, a part of me already missing the garden. After sitting up on the stiff mattress, I rolled my shoulder and felt no pain or restriction in the movement. I carefully examined the skin under my tattered clothes. Everything seemed fine and well enough. I guess it does help to be favored by a goddess. A creak came from outside the door. I sprang up from the bed and scanned my surroundings. Everything was how Nate left it, except for the door that was now closed. That meant someone had been here. Another noise came from outside. I began looking for a weapon. The closest thing I could find was the TV remote. It wasn't much, but it could buy me a few seconds, and that's all I need. Slowly, I creeped closer to the door. I tightened my grip around the remote nervously. There was no telling who was on the other side of the door and what kind of threat they possessed. The doorknob clicked quietly as I turned it. I counted down from 3 before yanking the door open and chucking the remote at whatever moved first. Whoa, easy there, Tiger. What are you doing here? I yelled, calming my rapidly beating heart. It was just Harley. Relax. She tossed the remote she caught with her vampiric reflexes back to me. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm on guard duty. I tossed the remote on one of the beds. Guard duty? Harley coughed and rolled her eyes, crossing her arms in her chest. Yes, guard duty. I got caught after helping those humans escape, so this is my punishment. The humans are okay though, right? Yes, Harley yelled, exasperated. I'm fine too, by the way. Thanks for asking. It was my turn to roll my eyes. Why are you on guard duty anyway? Shouldn't you have, I don't know, extra killed me or something? Can't. Now grab your stuff and let's go, Harley demanded. Go? Go where? I did a double take. What do you mean you can't kill me? Harley looked behind me to my scattered belongings across the room. She tapped her finger on an imaginary watch that rested on her wrist. I sighed and started gathering my things. I wasn't going to pry any information out of her if I didn't do as she asked. Orders from the boss, Harley answered as I slipped a shirt into my backpack. She was standing outside the room, stranded out there until I gave her an invitation in. You might want to change into something that doesn't have holes in it. It's a bit chilly outside. I looked down at the bloody and torn orderly uniform I had on. I picked up a mostly clean pair of jeans off the floor and grabbed the t-shirt I just put into my backpack. A minute later, I was dressed and comfortable. I slung my packed backpack over my shoulder and made my way out to Harley. I never did invite her in. She pulled out a set of keys and clicked the button. A motorcycle parked across the lot chirped in response. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, slowly following Harley to her bike. "I said I'd help you, didn't I? I'm taking you to the rest of you freaks. That nerd Nathan and the new one." Nate? He's working for Wesson. You know that, right? He betrayed me, tried to kill me," I said, fumbling with my hands. "Oh, I know," she said nonchalantly. My eyes opened wide in surprise. "You knew? This whole time you knew and you didn't tell me?" Harley stopped, just shy of her bike. "About Nate? Hell no, I just recently found out. And believe me, I was just as shocked as you were. All I know is what happened to you was done to send a message." "Who'd want to send a message by killing me?" Harley sighed and rubbed a temple. Are you really that dense? My boss, the creator of vampires, Wesson, the god of death, Mara's brother?" It clicked in my head. Harley saw the exact moment I realized and rolled her eyes again. "Who did you think my boss was?" Harley yelled in disbelief. "A 4,000-year-old vampire or something." "You're an idiot." Harley flipped her long black hair, then turned to get on her bike. "Now come on, we've got places to be. You need to be careful. Wesson will be there. Whatever he's been up to lately, it's happening tonight." "Well, maybe when we get there, I can sneak up on Wesson, catch him by surprise or something like that, and rescue Emily." "You really are an idiot. You can't sneak up on him." Harley chuckled. "He's a god." I pressed my lips into a thin line. She was right. Then my blood ran cold after what she said next. "Besides, he already knows you're coming. He's the one that sent me to get you. Now hop on, we're burning moonlight." I reluctantly did as asked. It essentially sounded like I was being sent to my doom, and I was utterly defenseless to stop it. Harley started up her hawk before revving the engine and peeling out of there. "Ugh, man," she said as I tightened my grip around her waist, too scared of falling off to let go. A couple hours later, Harley and I arrived at this secluded log cabin in the woods that was in the middle of nowhere. "What is this place?" I asked Harley after disembarking off her bike. The cabin itself wasn't very big, but it wasn't small either. The cabin was rustic but chic, with this eerie and dark aura surrounding the place. Just being outside the house gave me the heebie-jeebies. It was like what I felt back in the garden with Mara, but tenfold. Harley explained. "This, in the vampiric community, is called the Kill Shed. It's Wesson's favorite place to hang out, not only because of all the death, but because the woods surrounding this place reminds him of the Garden of Mara. You either come here because you're a high-ranking member and Wesson needs you to do something, or you're getting shanked." "Oh, well, that's reassuring," I responded sarcastically. A cold sweat broke out on my skin as we approached the cabin's door. A place called the Kill Shed can't mean anything good. Harley put a supportive hand on my shoulder. "Yeah, you're kinda screwed, Henry." Harley's hand hovered above the red-painted door for a moment before she knocked. "Hey, whatever happens in there, I'll try to have your back. But you should know that if Wesson gives me a direct order, I have to do it. Like, I literally have no control over my own body or mind. It's like that shit Nate does, but worse." I pressed my lips into a thin line. She really was just trying to be helpful, but she wasn't easing my anxiety about this at all. "Thanks for letting me know that, I guess. I appreciate that." Harley gave a curt nod before knocking a few times. A second later, the door opened by itself, and an unfamiliar deep voice shouted, "Come in." I followed the vampiric biker chick into the cabin. We passed the mud room and were sped out into the living room. Despite the outside's exterior, it looked pretty modern and well decorated on the inside. There was a fire roaring in the large fireplace where a huge flat screen was mounted above on the wall. There were two large white sectionals and a glass coffee table and gold rims. A black to white umber rug rested beneath it. The kitchen and living room were split by a large bar. The interior of the cabin was very open. Standing in the middle of the room was a tall and pale man. His hair was black and trimmed short. His eyes were a magnificent shade of gray. The man wore a plain black suit with a bow tie. He was handsome and seemed young, looking to be in his mid to late 20s. But I almost fell when I noticed the giant infinity sign hovering above his head. That was definitely Wesson. "Ah, our guests have arrived," he said, opening his arms in a welcoming gesture. Nate, who had previously been sitting on the couch facing away from us, stood when he saw my ugly mug. "You're alive?" My blood started to boil just at the sight of that traitor. I stormed over to him and punched him, hard. "Yeah, no thanks to you." Nate stumbled back and held his nose in pain. I smiled as a drop of blood fell onto the beige sweater vest he was wearing. He was back in his regular nerdy getup. Suddenly, I felt my body go rigid. I couldn't move even if I wanted to. "Tut tut," Wesson said as suddenly my body flung harshly on the couch in a sitting position. "There will be no fights on my wedding day." "Wedding day?" I asked myself, not completely sure I heard what he said right. A flash of white caught my eye. I turned to see Emily sitting on the couch, wearing a white strapless wedding dress. What the hell did I just stumble into? Nate steadied himself and joined us back on the couch. Yeah, I couldn't believe it either. I looked at Harley standing just outside the living room, keeping guard. She blatantly wore a disgusted expression. A similar look to hers was on my face. I know what you puny mortals must be thinking, and quite frankly, I could care less. If my sister won't let me back into her garden, I'll do her one better. I'll marry her instead. My brain stopped functioning for a second. He wanted to marry his sister? The one who essentially hated him? Then it hit me. Both Emily and Mara have similar characteristics. Their long blonde hair, fair complexion. They even had the same slim but athletic body type. Even I had to admit, if they stood together, they could look like sisters. Emily started gagging, understandably. I don't want to marry you, she yelled, tears flying down her face. Wesson balled his hand into a fist, and Emily stopped crying, reduced to whimpering in fear. It's either this or death, my dear. Kill me then, Emily yelled, jerking forward on the couch. Clearly, she was being kept there by Wesson's hand. We both were. The only one not affected was Nate. Wesson actually took a second to consider Emily's wishes, before shrugging his shoulders. Actually, you don't have a choice in the matter, darling. Emily seemed to go back into the fugue state she was in back in the mental hospital, but this time without the use of drugs. I didn't blame her. Hiding in the recesses of her mind seemed like the safest thing to do at the moment. This was all just so fucked up. He was doing all this for what? Some kind of psychological mindfuck power move over his sister? A sudden whoosh of wind filled the cabin, and a sly smile crept onto Wesson's pervy lips. Stop this madness at once. Mara appeared behind us on the couch, closer to the bar. She stormed her way over to Wesson. There was an infinity sign above her head too. I guess my abilities didn't work in the garden, since it hadn't been there before. Instead of the toga-like gown she'd been in before, Mara was wearing a frilly white jumper. What are you doing? Release my chosen ones at once, she demanded. Wesson scoffed. Sister, I have no intentions to do so. Emily will be my bride, and you're powerless to stop it. If you ever want to step foot into my garden again, you'll cease this foolishness. Now, she yelled. A flash of hope flooded in Wesson's eyes. With a single snap of his fingers, Emily was back in plain clothes, just a white t-shirt and leggings, and we were released from the couch. Jumping at the opportunity, Emily and I both got to our feet and huddled near Mara. Nate stood by Wesson's side. Wesson now wore a Nirvana band tee and black jeans. Really? I can go back to the garden now? Mara scoffed in disbelief. No, she pointed between Wesson and Emily. What just happened is a step in the right direction, but don't begin to think I've forgotten your treachery. Her eyes burned holes into Nate's soul. turning my own chosen one against me. It's despicable." A scowl formed on Wesson's face. He looked pissed. Mara turned to Nate, dismissing her brother entirely. "I'm disappointed in you, Nathaniel. Truly," Mara said, hurt clear in her tone. "I thought we were friends," I added, trying to hold back my bitterness and anger. "I trusted you." Emily couldn't even look at him. She just shook her head. "You don't understand," Nate shouted, his voice cracking with pain. A tear slipped down his cheek. "It's my fault they're dead. My family is dead because of me." Emily covered her gaping mouth in shock. I, on the other hand, was confused. I thought they died in a car accident. Mara just gave him a pitiful look. "They weren't even supposed to be on the road that night," he explained, nudging his glasses to wipe away a tear. "I was at a party, and people started doing drugs and drinking. I didn't feel comfortable at all, and the friends that took me were in no condition to drive. So I called my parents to come pick me up. My little sister had been restless that night, so she tagged along. If I hadn't begged them to pick me up from that party, if I'd just stayed there, if that man had just pulled over to get some sleep, then maybe they'd still be alive." "Oh, Nate, that's not your fault," Emily said, softly, sympathizing with him. He shook his head, refusing to believe it. I had to admit, his story did tug at my heartstrings a bit. "I was confused after the accident about all the things I could smell. Then I came across a vampire one day and realized what I was meant to do. So I devoted myself to the extermination of vampires after to focus on something, anything, do some good. Then one day, Wesson came to me and explained all my powers and everything. He promised that if I did this one thing for him, he'd bring them back, he'd bring my family back, and we'd be together again, we'd be happy." "Oh, little one, it seems my brother has misguided you," Mara said with a genuine pout. She walked over to him and cupped her hand on his cheek, brushing another tear away. She then glared at her brother menacingly. "He can't bring souls back from the dead, only reap them." Nate's face paled. But he said he could bring them back. You said you'd bring my family back." His shock turned to rage as he charged towards Wesson, the god of death himself. "Thank you for everything you've done, Nate. But unfortunately, it seems that your services are no longer needed," Wesson said coldly, flicking his wrist in Nate's direction. Just as he got within a foot of Wesson, Nate's body suddenly collapsed to the floor. His skin went pale and cold, his limbs stiff. "Nate?" Emily cried, running to his corpse, vigorously trying to shake him awake. "Are you alright?" Wesson chuckled and covered the side of his face while pointing at Emily. "Not the brightest crayon in the box, is she? What slim pickings you had, dear sister." Coming to terms with his death, Emily closed his eyes and hugged his body. "That's it? You just use him to do your bidding, then kill him when he's irrelevant?" I shouted in anger. I was still hurt by Nate's betrayal, but he had his reasons. The guy just wanted his family back, and I could sympathize. "I've had enough of you, human," Wesson spat before waving his hand. Suddenly, everything went dark. Quiet. It wasn't cold. I felt nothing. I felt myself fading into the darkness that surrounded me. This giant black void of nothingness. A faraway snap echoed in my ear. Suddenly, I was back in the cabin. I blinked a few times, trying to comprehend the experience I just had. I nearly got my bearings back when I once again returned to the void. Another snap, and I was brought back. I felt lightheaded and nauseous. The overwhelming urge to puke engulfed my stomach. "Wesson, you can't just erase people out of existence because they annoy you," Mara chastised her brother. She gave me a small smile when she noticed I was back from oblivion. "Oh hush, Mara," Wesson shouted. "You're just saying that because he's your favorite little human. He always has been. If it had been anyone else, you wouldn't care. You'd just make another. I ought to kill him just to piss you off. He's just so murderable." "You're unbearable, brother," Mara groaned. "You're acting worse than when you spread the little plague of yours around." They really do bicker like siblings. "This is a new low even for you, brother," Mara spat, mourning the death of one of her chosen ones. Nate had been the strongest and more skilled between the three of us. "You know what's low, Mara?" Wesson seethed, giving me false hope. Mara rolled her eyes and stomped closer to her brother. "Oh, get over yourself. These are the consequences of your actions. Deal with them," she boomed. Wesson huffed. "Fuck it. I'll do you one better, sister." He looked at an imaginary watch on his wrist. The moon cycle's about right." Wesson aimed his pointer finger at Nate's corpse. "I broke him once. I'll do it again." Suddenly, a loud crunching sound came from the body, and it jerked. Emily flinched away from the body. Another jerk and Nate's eyes flung open. He started wailing out in pain. I mean, it was a blood-curdling scream. "Harley, leave them to it," the god of death ordered. Doing as he said, Harley left the cabin, and the sound of her motorcycle engine turning on and rumbling away filled the room. "Wesson," Mara said testingly. "Let your chosen ones kill that," Wesson said, disappearing. "Wesson!" Mara shouted angrily, storming off after her brother. She took a step and then mid-step of another, seemingly vanished into thin air. "What's happening to him?" Emily screamed as more of Nate's shouts filled the room. His once previously limp and very dead body was convulsing something fierce. It looked like a scene out of a horror movie. "I don't know," I answered truthfully. Something looked to be squirming underneath his skin. I took a closer look at his body. Is he? Wet sounds of skin shredding and tearing open made me want to vomit. Nate's screams turned to snarls and growls. Hair started growing out of his skin, and his body contorted into unnatural shapes. Emily took another cautious step back as the hulking furry mass stood up. An ear-shattering howl pierced the air. "No way, he's a werewolf now?" A disbelieving chuckle escaped me. "Oh, you've gotta be fucking kidding me. Emily, duck!" I warned as the werewolf version of Nate threw one of Wesson's white armchairs our way. He let out a ferocious and angry roar as he completed the action. The once small and nerdy-looking man we once knew was now an almost 8-foot-tall bundle of brown fur and muscles that possessed Herculean strength. His mouth-turned snout was full of sharp fangs, with long protruding claws in place of his fingernails. A magnificent yellow hue emanated from Nate's eyes. He honestly could have passed for something out of a classic monster movie, maybe even scarier than that. We managed to jump out of the way just in the nick of time as the piece of furniture whizzed past us and crashed on the floor by the kitchen table. "Mara!" I shouted as a curse, but also in hopes the goddess would show up and help us. In the meantime, I pulled Emily behind me, who gladly used me as a human shield. "What do we do, Henry? What do we do?" she cried, holding onto me with trembling hands. "I barely fought vampires. Now we're supposed to fight that?" The armchair's twin was next, which ended up crashing into the wall we were crouched under. "Quick, to the bar!" I shouted as pieces of splintered wood rained down on us. The two of us dove for cover behind the bar, while the massive monster was distracted, looking for more expensive-looking furniture to throw at us. It seemed Nate had his eye on one of the larger sectionals. I prayed he hadn't seen us. Behind the counter was a shelf packed full of bar glasses. If that couch were to be thrown while we were back here, the aftermath wouldn't be pretty. Thankfully, an outraged howl proved we hadn't been spotted. Emily looked scared out of her mind, her hands covering her mouth to quiet her shuddering breath. I put my hand on her tense shoulder and gave her a sloppy smile and my best reassuring look. Her shoulder loosened a bit, and she took a calming breath. Now that Emily was feeling better, I was feeling better too. We then took a moment to collect ourselves and come up with a game plan. "Can you take control of him?" Emily whispered. "He's not a vampire," I responded, "so I don't know." Emily frowned. "Can you try?" "Why don't you try?" I countered. She looked at me puzzled. "Oh, that's right, you don't know," I realized. "All of us can control vampires. We all have multiple abilities. Nate was lying to us." "What?" she yelled at me, punching my arm. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Sorry, I was busy getting sent to oblivion," I told her. Peeking behind the counter to look for Nate, he was stomping around the middle of the living room, I looked back at Emily, who just rolled her eyes. Whatever, I mumbled, taking a breath and closing my eyes. I tried to summon my power, feeling that electric tug in my stomach again, but it never came. I tried again, focusing my entire being on Nate. I pictured him seizing up in that spot, unable to move. I opened my eyes. Nothing. I gave up hope and crouched behind the counter again. Shit, I mumbled, shaking my head. I can't. Emily let out a disappointing sigh. We should look for something to defend ourselves with until we can find a way out of here, or until Nate goes back to normal. If he goes back to normal, I scoffed. Emily shot me a hard glance. While analyzing our surroundings, I noticed a gun locker in the corner of the dining room I hadn't seen before. Slowly, a plan started to formulate in my mind. Hey, you know how some vampire lore in the media is accurate? I asked Emily. Looking back at the locker, she nodded, the realization slowly dawning on her when she saw what I was staring at. Maybe it's the same for Nate. What are the chances Wesson has silver bullets in there? There are myths that one of vampire's weaknesses is silver, so I don't see why not, she responded. I've got an idea, I tell her. I'm going to go look in that gun locker for silver bullets, or any weapon that might help us. Do you think you can distract him while I do that? Emily quickly took a peek behind that bar to check up on Nate's position. Currently, a flat-screen TV was getting ripped out of the wall. What do I do if he charges at me? Try to use your fire if he gets too close. But he's still a chosen one, right? My fire won't do anything to him. I sigh, seeing the glimmer of hope in her eyes. I hate to say it, Emily, but I'm not entirely sure Nate is still in there. We don't exactly know what he is now. Wesson killed him. Nate was dead before he turned into that thing. You're right, she responded dejectedly. Pouting, Emily readied herself to jump out from behind the bar and cause a distraction. Hey, I said. At the very least, your flames will protect you and keep him at bay, alright? You'll be okay. Emily grabbed onto my wrist suddenly and stared into my soul. We're not killing him, are we? I couldn't bring myself to answer her. Truth be told, I had no idea what the hell I was doing or where this was going. My only goal was getting us through this alive and in one piece. If that meant killing this werewolf, then so be it. A tense moment of silence passed between us before I broke it. On my count, okay? I said, brushing the question off and waiting for her confirmation. Emily nodded, dropping the subject. Then I began counting down. In 1, 2, 3. Now! Emily and I both sprang out from behind the bar at the same time. While I lunged for the lock on the single-unit gun locker, Emily grabbed 2 glasses from the shelf and started banging them together. She ran to the opposite side of the living room to give us as much space as possible. Clink, clink, clink. Hey, I'm over here, you big smelly mutt! Clink, clink, clink. Nate had been crouched down on the floor. He stopped gnawing on quartz and plastic before angrily chucking the TV across the living room. Emily dodged with a yelp. Is that all you got, Nate? She taunted after collecting herself, continuing to bang the glasses together. Clink, clink, clink. Nate snarled and rose from the ground, slowly stalking towards his prey. His sharp fangs glinted in the artificial light when he bore his teeth at Emily. Large streams of slobber slipped out of his mouth as he growled menacingly. Henry, hurry up! Emily yelled at me nervously, backing up. He looks pissed. I'm working on it, I yelled back. Not only was the locker locked, the metal door was rusted shut. It looked like the thing hadn't been opened in ages. My hope in finding silver bullets quickly dwindled. I didn't have the key for the lock, and there wasn't time to snoop through the cabin to find it. The lock looked old and brittle, so I figured I might be able to kick it open. But even if I did manage to break the lock, I still needed something to pry the metal door open with. Scanning the dining room, I noticed the table had been set. On top of a smooth white silk tablecloth, fancy plates and china lined the table. Wine and water glasses were paired with every plate. More importantly, there was silverware. Silverware that I could use as a makeshift crowbar. I swiped the knife from the table and walked back over to the gun locker. Taking a step back, I wound my leg up and then kicked the lock hard. A loud metallic clunk filled the cabin. Apparently, it was loud enough to get Nate's attention. He turned away from Emily and focused on me. Clink, clink, clink. "Don't pay attention to him," Emily shouted, clanking her glasses together more frantically. "I'm over here. Look over here, you stupid furball." Her attempt to redirect Nate's attention worked. He roared as he turned back to her, seemingly forgetting about me. "Henry, whatever you're doing, make it quick." I nodded my head as I readied myself for another good kick. Hopefully, the lock was old and rickety enough to break in a couple of tries. If I couldn't open this locker in time, there was a good chance Emily and I would end up as puppy chow. I pushed that thought out of my mind and took another step back, but farther away. I ran and kicked the lock for a second time. Again, a metallic thump sounded out, but the clanking sound of glass kept Nate distracted. The sound of metal falling to the floor was like music to my ears. The lock had broken. Now all that stood between life and death was a rusted shut door. Quickly, I took the knife and tried to wedge it in the door, but the rust was like a sealant. I tried scraping at the rust, trying to carve out a small hole I could use to pry the door open. It took a minute, but I managed to create a crevice I could stick the knife in. I tried pulling the door open, but a singular knife wouldn't cut it. I ended up bending the metal, and it became totally useless. I pulled it out and chucked it on the ground. I returned to the table and grabbed 2 more knives. If I could split the weight, maybe they wouldn't bend and I'd be able to pry open the door. I scraped some more rust and stuck both knives in. I pulled once more. I thought I was beginning to feel the door start to give when the knives I was using bent again. In a fit of anger, I threw the knives on the ground and kicked the locker. "Henry, what are you doing?" Emily yelled angrily as Nate turned and roared at me. "I'm trying to keep him over here." A light bulb went off as an idea suddenly popped into my head. "No, wait. I need him over here. I can use him to break open the gun locker," I explained. Emily looked at me dumbfounded. "How? Are you sure that's even a good idea?" "Not really, but it's the best I can come up with right now. Just remember, he's a wild animal at the moment. He's unpredictable. I've barely been able to keep him from pouncing on me," she warned. "I'll be careful, okay? Right now, this is our only hope," I responded. Emily gave me a nod of approval. I began kicking and smacking the gun locker, trying to keep Nate's attention on me. If I could get him to crash into the gun locker and knock it down, the force might just be enough to open the door and reveal the contents inside. "Come on, big guy. Come get me," I yelled, pounding on the locker even harder. "Yeah, that's it. I'm over here. What are you gonna do about it?" My adrenaline spiked when Nate started to charge at me. Despite my fear, I kept banging and shouting, watching the anger rise in his eyes. I kept goading him on until he was about 2 feet away. I barely managed to jump out of the way right before Nate barreled into the locker. The sweet sound of rusted metal creaking open rang out as the gun locker fell to the floor. Nate, having so much momentum, had flipped over the gun locker and had crashed into the back wall, leaving a gargantuan hole in the drywall. He quickly recovered though, shaking the dust and debris off his fur as he got to his feet. I scrambled to the open locker looking for a gun and ammo. Inside, strapped to the wall, was a pump-action shotgun. Stray bullets and empty ammo packages were strewn about inside the locker and outside on the floor. Unfortunately, none of them contained silver bullets in them. I hurriedly grabbed the gun and started searching for the appropriate ammo. At the least, this mission hasn't been a total bust. Now we had something to defend ourselves with. "Look out!" Emily shouted. I registered her words too late and was caught off guard. The wind got knocked out of me as a clawed fist connected with my ribs. I clutched the gun close to me as I was thrown a couple of feet. I laid on the floor for a second, rolling onto my back, only able to take shallow breaths without feeling tremendous waves of pain in my chest. My ears were ringing and the world went dark for a second. Pretty sure one of my ribs was broken. The sound of Emily yelling, "Fuck!" quickly brought me back. I rolled onto my side just in time to see her chuck one of the bar glasses at Nate's head. He had been about 2 seconds away from ripping my throat out. The glass shattered on impact and immediately Nate had let out a ferocious howl. He wiped the glass shards from his fur before he turned back to me. "Get away from him," Emily screeched as she chucked another glass. Just like the first one, it hit his temple and broke on impact. This really pissed Nate off. He lost interest in me and charged for Emily instead. She shrieked and ran towards the shelf for more glasses to throw. I managed to gather enough strength and sat myself up on the floor. I registered the feel of the gun in my hand as the fog in my mind slowly started to recede. "Stay back!" I heard Emily shout as a bright flash of light lit up the cabin. A confused yelp came from Nate. I turned to see a blast of fire shoot out of Emily's palm. Her flames licked Nate's snout and he backed up, confused and scared of the fire. Emily blasted more of her flames at the werewolf, but it soon became evident to us that no damage was being done to him. "Fire retardant werewolves," I scoffed. "Don't see that every day." The full intensity of the situation finally hit me at that moment, and I shook the remaining fog out of my head. Nate soon came to the same realization as we did. While he experimented clawing at the fire and not feeling pain, I managed to get to my feet and started pilfering through shattered glass, shards of metal and broken pieces of wood for any shotgun shells I could find. Thankfully, I found 4 rounds. I quickly loaded the gun and aimed. 1 round in his chest. Nate barely seemed inconvenienced. He stopped playing around and walked through one of Emily's blasts like it was nothing. Emily grabbed another glass and smashed it on Nate's nose. Nate roared and slashed at her. He managed to land a good blow on her forearm. Emily scrambled away, holding her bleeding arm in pain, trying to stop the bleeding. A mix of adrenaline and rage filled me. I reloaded my shotgun. Another round into his chest, the momentum of the shot knocking Nate off kilter for a moment. "Back!" Reload. This time, I hit his shoulder. Skin and muscle tore off as the metal pellets made contact. His wound healed in a second. "The fuck?" My last round ended up hitting Nate in the stomach. This time, the blast was strong enough to knock him a couple feet back. "Up!" Nate landed on the floor by the coffee table. I took advantage of the time he was down to sift through debris to find more ammo. "That was badass," Emily cheered. "If you can find more ammo, we might just be able to get out of here." I let out a hopeful chuckle. Maybe we could make it out of here relatively unscathed. Our good feelings were drowned out by a blood-curdling and outraged snarl that filled the cabin as Nathan picked himself up. He looked around frantically for something to grab and throw. His eyes settled on the gold-rimmed glass coffee table. Being the closest to him, Nate picked up the table and aimed it straight for Emily's head. "Oh shit," she cried, bracing for impact, knowing she didn't have any time to get out of the way. I had realized what Nate was going to do a couple seconds before he picked up the table and started running towards Emily. Seconds before he started the action of slamming the coffee table down, I barely managed to push her out of the way in time. As the coffee table was flung at me, I shut my eyes tight and braced my whole body for pain. All I could do in that moment was wish for it not to hurt too bad. Suddenly, a familiar, electric and powerful feeling overcame me. My body went rigid, then into overdrive. The intense mixed feelings of energy, anger and power churned through my veins. "Oh shit?" Emily asked, surprised. I unscrunched one of my eyes to see what was happening. Nate kept pushing down on the table, confused on why the table was suspended in mid-air and not budging. I let out a disbelieving gasp. Even though there wasn't a single doubt in my mind, this was me. This was the same feeling I had when taking control over vampires. Only this time, it seemed I could telekinetically control inorganic materials. Where the hell was this power a second ago? A flashback of Mara kissing my forehead back at the garden earlier popped into my head. Then it hit me that she must have blessed me with another ability as some sort of safeguard in case things went wrong. With a confident smirk, I controlled the coffee table and ripped it out of Nate's grasp. I flipped the script and smashed the table over the werewolf's head. Nate was knocked back down and shards of glass rained down on him and impaled him in many different spots. If he wasn't a fast-healing, practically invincible werewolf, Nate would definitely have bled out and died by now. "Hold on, was that you, Henry?" Emily asked, getting up off the floor and cautiously backing away from our monstrous tormentor. "You did this?" "Get away from us," I ordered. "It's about to get real ugly in here." Emily did as I said and ran back into the kitchen, right as Nate started to stir. Testing out my new abilities, I imagined the discarded and broken flat-screen TV floating over and hovering above Nate. Then I willed it to happen right as he tried to sit up. Then I smashed it down. Nate's head flew back and hit the ground. He lifted his head off the floor and I smashed the TV down again. The third time, Nate predicted what I would do and annoyingly grabbed the TV and threw it, smashing it into the dining room table. From the sheer force of the throw, the table collapsed onto itself, sending fine china and glassware flying everywhere. He flung himself up onto his feet and cracked his neck while giving me a menacing glare. In response, I cracked my knuckles and looked for a heavy piece of furniture I could hurl at him. Back in the kitchen, it seemed Emily was exploring and looking for a way to help. "Did these knives bend super easily, especially when they were heated in your hand?" she asked, migrating over and crouching over the destroyed dining room table, inspecting the area near where I had discarded the useless knives from the locker. "Really? You're asking these questions now?" I cried, narrowly avoiding getting my hand bitten off. "Yes or no, Henry? Yes or no? Please, it's important," she begged. "Yeah, they did, Emily," I answered, using a lamp cover as a shield from Nate's chomping maw. "Good, that's good. I think this silverware is made out of actual silver then." "What? Wait, really?" "Yeah," she answered, examining one of the bent knives closely. "Silver is notoriously malleable and is actually the 6th most ductile metal. If you know what you're looking for, it's pretty easy to spot." I grabbed a couple of bar glasses, using my mind, and smashed them onto different parts of Nate's body in order to give myself time to get some distance from him. "How did you even know that?" Emily chuckled. "My dad taught me. He loves learning about different metals and the elements. He also had a weird obsession with the gold rush, so he's a wealth of geologic and historic facts." I noticed her hand started to glow. Pretty quickly, the knife superheated and developed a chrome-looking coating. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to smelt this silverware down and shape it into bullets." "Mind tossing me one of those knives to use while you do that?" I asked, taking my attention off of Nate for a second. Emily grabbed the knife and was about to pass it to me when Nate used his new supernatural speed to body slam into me. I heard a sickening crack as our bodies connected. I cried out in pain as Nate sent me gliding into the bar counter. I managed to sit up, where I realized my left shoulder had been dislocated. Pain clouded my mind and made it extremely difficult to control the furniture around me. Weakly, I tossed the bar stool at Nate, who used his unnaturally fast reflexes to swipe it away. "Emily!" I groaned out, straining to crawl away from my werewolf attacker. "I'm almost done, Henry. Hold on," she yelled as she finished smelting down the knife. She played with the heated metal like it was Play-Doh, pulling the metal apart and shaping the pieces into little pellets with her bare hands, the extremely heated object seemingly not burning her skin. Nate let out a gleeful chuff as he closed the gap between us. I let out a scared whimper as he pounced and held me under the ground by my neck. I clawed and scratched at his furry wrists, begging for release and proper airflow. I tried to use my telekinesis to grab onto Nate himself, but just like earlier, it didn't work. Suddenly, a sharp and intense pain came from my shin as Nate stomped on it, staring me in the eyes as he did so. I started seeing stars and lost my hearing for a second. Then a high-pitched ringing noise rattled my ears. It took me a moment to realize my ears weren't ringing. It was my agonizing scream. I looked down to see a bloodied, mangled mess of skin, muscle, and bones. My right lower leg had been completely decimated. The sound of the shotgun being pumped and loaded rang out from the bar. Emily had loaded her silver pellets into a discarded shotgun shell casing and loaded it into the gun. She now stood at attention while Nate bared his fangs and licked the skin on my neck, savoring the stench of fear wafting off me. "Don't you dare touch another hair on his head, Nate," Emily demanded as she took a calculated step towards us. "I won't hesitate to blow a hole into you." I felt his grip loosen around my neck for a moment, before Nate let out an annoyed grunt and began lightly nipping the skin around my carotid artery. I let out a choked cry as the blood loss caught up to me. I was freezing and started feeling sleepy. "I'm sorry to do this then," she said. Suddenly, a loud explosion filled the room as the gun went off. Nate yelped and released his hold over me. He backed up, clutching the side of his stomach. Blood trickled through his fingers and puddled on the ground beneath me. "I did it," she said to herself in disbelief. "The bullets worked." Lazily, I moved my eyes to Nate, whose wound hadn't started healing yet. Blood was still seeping out through his fingers as Nate faltered, almost collapsing. He caught himself though, and managed to keep himself steady. He let out a pained roar as he used his anger as a crutch and charged at Emily. She stood there frozen in shock, expecting him to go down with that one shot. Even with my waning consciousness, I understood how fucked we both were. Emily had only one bullet and didn't have any more on her. I was mangled to high hell. Even running only on fumes and sheer willpower alone, I couldn't move, much less help her. Even if she lunged for more silverware to use as a weapon, I doubted she'd be able to outrun Nate, even in his injured state. It seemed like all hope was lost. Despite all of our efforts and divine intervention, we still lost. This was it. This was the end. We were both going to die. A blinding white light enveloped my vision. This is it, I thought. Go towards the light. Let this all be over. As the light started to dim, however, I realized it was a light. But it wasn't the light. It was Mara rejoining us. I used what little strength I had. I opened my eyelids to see Mara standing between Emily and Nate. She was in a protective stance, shielding Emily. Mara shot her a smile before turning and taking a step closer to her former chosen one. The werewolf Nate growled as the goddess walked on air to get up to his eye level. She suddenly pounced and gently kissed him on the forehead. In an instant, he was out like a light. His body began contorting once again, but this time, the hair and wolfish features receded, turning Nate back into his regular human self. He laid on the floor, passed out and naked, blood still pouring from his gunshot wound. Mara waved her hand over the gaping wound, and when she moved it, it was like the injury had never been there. The goddess then walked over to Emily and checked in on her. "How are you doing, darling?" she asked as she healed the wounds on Emily's forearm. "Better, now that you're here," she responded tearfully. Mara nodded pleasantly. Emily pointed at me and silently pleaded to Mara with her eyes. She looked over to me and frowned when she saw the condition I was in. "Henry," Mara whispered in my ear. "You really know how to get into it, don't you? You remind me so much of my brother." She hastily added, "but in a good way." She then leaned in close and kissed my forehead once more. The pain went away, feeling like it was only a fever dream. Now feeling awake and refreshed, I noticed Mara had healed my wounds and all the damage done to my leg. "Thank you," I said gratefully. "My apologies," she said while helping me get to my feet. "I would have gotten here sooner were I not out looking for Wesson. My brother can be particularly hard to find when he doesn't want to be found. Anyway, at least someone is done throwing a tantrum." Mara looked over to Nate's sleeping body. Both Emily and I cautiously walked over to him. "Relax, children. He's not dead," she said calmly. "He is, however, still a werewolf. That I unfortunately cannot undo." "What did you do to him?" Emily and I both asked in unison. "A second chance," Mara answered in a whisper, taking a deep shuddering breath. "Something tells me he deserved a second chance, and maybe in time, I'll be able to give my brother a second chance too." Mara said nothing else before simply disappearing. Then Nate woke up. He sat up and clutched the side of his head. I'm sure it felt like he had the world's worst hangover. "What happened? My head is killing me," he groaned. Nate realized he was naked and hid his private bits behind his hands. Why am I naked?" Emily smacked the back of his head. He yelped out in pain as he started rubbing the sore spot. Nate shot Emily a glare. "You got turned into a werewolf and tried to eat us," she seethed, folding her arms into her chest. Nate looked at me for clarity. I folded my arms into my chest too. "You were literally about to rip my throat out," I said, gesturing to the destruction done to the cabin affectionately dubbed the Kill Shed, which in its current state was a pretty fitting name. "I did all that?" he questioned breathlessly. He seemed freaked out, understandably so. "Most of it, yeah," I answered. I flicked my wrist and a glass shard started floating. Nate's eyes practically popped out of their sockets at the demonstration of my newfound power. I quickly released my hold over the object and it clattered to the floor. "Most of it." "I can barely comprehend what you just told me, and now you have a new ability? God, everything smells 10 times worse than it did before. What the hell is going on? I don't remember a thing." "I'll explain it to you later," I told him, patting his shoulder while pulling the tablecloth over for him to cover up. "Guys," Emily interjected. "What are we supposed to do now?" A phone suddenly appeared in front of us. On it, the dramatic sting of a breaking news broadcast began playing. The three of us focused our attention on the phone. It was a local news station covering an ongoing case. Apparently, in the last couple of hours, there has been a rise in random violent wild animal attacks all around the country. My heart sank as Emily and I both turned to stare at Nate. He let out a nervous gulp and played with the strap on his makeshift toga. We all knew the truth. Although random, they weren't just plain old animal attacks. Wesson was out there creating more werewolves, more chaos, more of a mess for us to clean up. Suddenly, the news report stopped playing and the phone vanished. In its place was a pink sticky note with a message written on it. "Help Nate control the wolf inside. Then you all know what to do. Mara." A couple days have gone by since the events at Wesson's cabin. Nate with us, though I adamantly voiced my opinion against it. Emily, however, convinced me otherwise. Not only did she cite Mara's note, but she guilt-tripped me by reiterating how Wesley Coatley killed Nate and then turned him into a monster without his consent. I caved, remembering what Mara said about second chances. I'm still watching him closely though. He still needs to regain both Emily and I's trust and needs to learn how to control his werewolf side. We're all getting used to Nate's new affliction. We don't know exactly what he can and can't do. What triggers the transformation besides the full moon, his weaknesses, and how to return him back to normal once he's changed. This, I suspect, is why Mara left us the note. If we can learn how Nate ticks, we can use that knowledge against the other werewolves Wesson created. We might even be able to use Nate to track them down as well. In the meantime, we're back at my apartment above Marty's. And no, I didn't get fired from my job, but I came close to. The night Nate showed up at the bar, I left Marty a note explaining that I had a family emergency I had to deal with urgently and didn't know when I'd be back. When I showed back up with these two, I had to beg not to be fired. Marty struck me on probation and I have to work doubles every day for the next month. A small sacrifice to pay for the greater good, in my opinion. Emily and Nate moved in. I gave the master bedroom to Emily and Nate my old air mattress. I'm sleeping on the couch. Sure, it's cramped, but it actually hasn't been that bad. But if we're going to do this, be a team, we need to get to know one another better. No more secrets and no more lies. Mara is counting on us to figure our shit out. Speaking of Mara, she just paid us a visit and delivered some fantastic news. "I fear my brother has yet again started up his shenanigans," she had said, suddenly appearing in the middle of my living room, glowing infinity sign and all. She gave us all a good startle. Nate actually started to shift, but with a single touch from Mara, he calmed down and his transformation stopped. Once we were sure he was okay, Mara continued. "Since his last ploy to get back into the garden failed, in yet another act of defiance, Wesson has stopped his cosmic duty and is refusing to reap souls." "What?" Emily yelped. Souls have stopped coming to the garden, our goddess reiterated. Nate let out a nervous, almost animalistic huff. So what does that mean? Trying to lighten the mood, I jokingly blurted out. Isn't it obvious, Nate? Zombies. I looked to Mara to validate my joke, but her expression was as serious as ever. Even with her color-changing irises, there was no hint of amusement in her eyes. Wait, you're serious? Actual zombies? My smile dissipated. I'm not sure, Mara answered truthfully. This was the most nervous I'd ever seen her. Something akin to that nature, yes. Once a mortal's body dies, the soul is meant to move on and rest in my garden. If the soul can't do that, it becomes trapped in its decaying body. The soul not being reaped starts to go stir-crazy, which causes the deterioration to accelerate. Thus, you have an angry soul that craves death and sweet release trapped in a decaying vessel. Based on this description, you could accurately describe these creatures as zombies. What is it with this dude and his obsession with the undead? I complained. First it was vampires, now it's zombies. Nate scoffed. Well, he is the god of death. I rolled my eyes at his response, because he was right. What are we supposed to do about that? Emily asked, freaking out. Right now, nothing, Mara answered. I let out a nervous cry. Nate sat down on the couch. He was stressed out of his mind. I could see his eyes start to glow yellow again. It'll be alright, she said stoically. This is my burden to handle right now. I've temporarily extended the human lifespan and done everything I can to prevent sudden and tragic deaths. Unfortunately, there is a scale to keep balanced here, so I can't stop everyone from dying. The problem is mostly contained for the moment, but the scale can tip at any moment. Is there anything we can do? Nate asked as he rubbed his temples. All you can do is try to lure my brother out, stall him for long enough so I can get to him, talk some sense into him. That's easy, I started. Wesson knows I'm your favorite, and I think, just like you, he has a special attachment to Nate. Mara brought her thumb to her lips and chewed them while thinking. I suppose that's true. She paused for a long moment, looking at Nate. He nodded his head slightly in agreement. I'll let the three of you workshop that idea. I do need to get back to my search for Wesson though. If you need me, I'll come as fast as I can. But for now, I must leave you, my chosen ones. Just as she had appeared, Mara was gone without a trace. She left without giving us a chance to say goodbye. Nate, Emily, and I all sat in silence. The amount of pressure we felt was tremendous. It was like the weight of the world was on our shoulders. How on earth were we going to make it out of this one? Alas, I think it's about time I log out. Got a lot of things on my plate right now. Damage control a rising werewolf epidemic. Try to prevent a potential zombie apocalypse. All the while eradicating blood-sucking vampires along the way. You know, the usual. Anyway, stay young. And don't let me catch you trying to buy alcohol underage. Signing off. The guy who can see people's ages. Henry West.